The internal narrative of the grandiose individual is not, I am good, but rather, I must be the best, because the alternative, being average, flawed, or insignificant, is utterly unbearable. This internal pressure creates a fantasy world where they are the hero, the genius, the most attractive, the most misunderstood visionary. This fantasy serves as a potent anesthetic against deep-seated feelings of shame, worthlessness, or inadequacy. We see this manifest in countless ways. In conversation, it can appear as a tendency to dominate the dialogue, to constantly reroute the topic back to their own achievements or experiences. It is the exaggeration of talents, the inflation of accomplishments, and the casual dismissal of the contributions of others. There is often an air of entitlement, a palpable expectation of special treatment. They believe the normal rules of social conduct do not apply to them because they are, in their own mind, fundamentally different. They expect the best table, the fastest service, the most fervent admiration, not as a pleasant surprise, but as their natural due. This grandiosity creates a profound distortion in their perception of reality. They see others not as separate individuals with their own rich inner lives, but as characters in their own personal drama. People are either admirers, tools, or obstacles. This is why a challenge to their grandiose self-image, a piece of criticism, or a perceived slight can trigger such a disproportionate reaction of rage or cold fury. You have not just disagreed with them, you have threatened the very foundation of the elaborate castle they have built to keep their inner demons at bay. As we rest here, at this first level, consider the immense energy required to maintain such a facade, the constant effort to project an image of perfection, to defend against any perceived attack, to keep the triumphant music playing lest the haunting silence of the empty halls rush in. Grandiosity is the armor. It is the brilliant, polished surface of the iceberg. But as we prepare to drift deeper, we know that the vast majority of the structure lies beneath the water, in the cold, quiet dark. In our next sessions, we will begin our descent, exploring the hidden layers of envy, shame, and emptiness that this grandiosity works so tirelessly to conceal. For now, simply let this understanding settle. Let the concept of the shimmering surface float in your mind as you yourself float, gently, on the current of sleep. Level 2. Need for admiration. As we allow our awareness to drift downwards, just below the surface of the water, we leave the visible tip of the iceberg and encounter level 2. Here, we find a fundamental, animating force, a quiet but constant engine that powers so much of what is to come. This is the profound and insatiable need for admiration. This is not the simple, healthy desire for recognition that we all experience. It is not the quiet satisfaction of a job well done or the warmth of a genuine compliment. For the narcissistic structure, the need for admiration is something far more primal. It is a form of psychological oxygen. It is the fuel, the currency, the very substance required to maintain the integrity of the grandiose yet fragile sense of self. In the language of psychology, this fuel is often called narcissistic supply. Let us consider the mechanism at play. A healthy sense of self-worth is, for the most part, internally regulated. It is a stable core built from experience, self-knowledge, and secure attachment. It can withstand criticism and does not evaporate in the absence of praise. The narcissistic self, however, lacks this internal generator.
It is like a beautiful, ornate vessel that is hollow on the inside. To feel full, to feel real, it must be constantly filled from external sources. Admiration, praise, envy, and even fear are the liquids that fill this void. Without a steady stream, the individual feels a terrifying sense of emptiness, a psychological collapse, a deflation of the self. The origins of this mechanism are a subject of deep psychodynamic thought. Theorists like Heinz Kohut spoke of the concept of mirroring. In healthy development, a child's burgeoning sense of self is mirrored back to them by the admiring and validating eyes of a parent. The gleam in a mother's eye, the father's proud smile, these moments confirm the child's existence and worth. If this mirroring is absent, inconsistent, or conditional, the child may grow into an adult who is forever searching for that missing reflection in the eyes of everyone they meet. They are on a lifelong quest to find a perfect mirror that will finally show them the flawless, admirable self they desperately need to be. This relentless need manifests in countless ways. In conversation, it is the person who subtly, or not so subtly, steers every topic back to their own achievements, their own insights, their own experiences. They are not listening to connect, they are listening for an opportunity to perform. They tell stories not to share, but to elicit a response of awe or envy. In the digital age, social media becomes the perfect stage for this performance.
It is a curated gallery of success, beauty, and happiness, meticulously designed to harvest admiration in the form of likes, shares, and adoring comments. Each notification is a small dose of the necessary supply, a momentary validation that the hollow vessel is, for now, still full. In relationships, the partner is often cast in the role of the primary admirer. They are expected to be a constant, unwavering source of praise and validation. When this supply inevitably wanes, as it does in all long-term human connections, the individual may grow cold, devaluing the partner who has failed in their essential duty to mirror back the perfect image. This is not a conscious, malicious strategy. It is a deep, compulsive drive. It is a survival mechanism for a self that cannot survive on its own. The tragedy of level 2 is that the satisfaction is always fleeting. The admiration of others is like salt water to the thirsty. It provides momentary relief, but ultimately leaves the emptiness more profound. The vessel always leaks. And so the search must begin again and again, a restless, unending cycle. As we settle deeper, allow this concept to rest in your mind, the constant, quiet hum of a machine that must be fed, the endless search for a perfect reflection. This is the engine of level 2, the need for admiration. And it is this very engine that propels us even further down, into the more complex and shadowed structures that lie waiting in the deep. Level 3. Entitlement. Welcome. As we continue our descent, allow your mind to gently disengage from the day. We are moving deeper now, below the surface-level observations, into the foundational structures of the narcissistic psyche. Here, at level 3, we encounter a concept that is both profoundly simple and extraordinarily complex. We encounter the architecture of entitlement. Entitlement in this context is not merely the petulance of wanting something one cannot have. It is not simple selfishness. Rather, it is a fundamental cognitive distortion, an entire operating system for reality. It is the unwavering, often unconscious belief that the universe and everyone in it operates, or should operate, according to a special set of rules that apply only to the self. It is a profound conviction of inherent specialness, a belief that one is exempt from the social contracts, the reciprocity, and the limitations that govern the rest of humanity. To understand its mechanism, we must travel back, conceptually, to the earliest stages of human development. For an infant, the world is, in a very real sense, an extension of its own will. A cry brings comfort. Discomfort brings a response.
This sense of infantile omnipotence is a necessary and normal developmental stage. However, a crucial part of healthy maturation involves the gradual and often frustrating realization that this is not so. The child learns that others have their own needs, that the world does not revolve around them, and that gratification is not always immediate. This process builds resilience, empathy, and a reality-based sense of self. The narcissistic individual, however, seems to suffer from a form of developmental arrest in this specific domain. For a variety of complex reasons, perhaps due to excessive praise that was not tied to actual achievement, or paradoxically, due to profound neglect which necessitated the creation of a grandiose fantasy self for survival, this infantile sense of omnipotence was never fully relinquished. It was instead calcified, becoming a core component of their adult personality. They continued to carry the deep, primal expectation that their needs, wants, and feelings are of paramount importance, and that the world should and must organize itself to meet them. This mechanism is what we call egosyntonic. This means the belief feels entirely natural, correct, and rational to the individual. They do not perceive their entitlement as entitlement, they perceive it as the natural order of things. When they expect the best service, immediate attention, or unquestioning agreement, they are not, in their own mind, being demanding.
They are simply expecting reality to conform to what they feel is a self-evident truth, their own superiority and importance. The application of this core belief is pervasive and can be observed in nearly every interaction. It is the individual who grows quietly furious when their partner is too tired to listen to their monologue about work, perceiving it not as a sign of their partner's exhaustion, but as a profound personal slight. It is the person who cuts in line, not with malicious intent, but with a genuine, unexamined assumption that their time is more valuable than the time of those waiting. It is the expectation that rules can be bent for them, that deadlines do not apply, and that apologies are things one receives, but rarely, if ever, gives. The true signature of this entitlement, however, is not the expectation itself, but the reaction when that expectation is violated. When the world fails to comply, when the special treatment is not given, when their opinion is challenged, when another person asserts a boundary, the response is not simple disappointment. It is a profound, searing sense of injustice. It is narcissistic injury. To them, it feels as though a fundamental law of the universe has been broken. The resulting rage or cold withdrawal is a desperate attempt to punish a world that has failed in its primary duty, to recognize and cater to their specialness. And so, as you drift, consider this intricate structure. It is not just a trait, but a lens through which the entire world is viewed. A quiet, powerful engine just below the surface, dictating reactions, shaping relationships, and ensuring that the self remains, always, at the very center of reality. This is the logic of entitlement, and as we sink deeper, we will see how this logic informs even more complex and hidden mechanisms below.
Level 4. Arrogance. As we continue our gentle descent, we arrive now at level 4 of the narcissism iceberg. Here, just below the surface, we encounter a feature that is both highly visible and profoundly misunderstood: arrogance. Let your mind settle as we explore this complex and fascinating defense. Think of arrogance not as a simple character flaw, but as the formidable outer wall of a fortress, meticulously constructed to protect a fragile interior. It is the projection of an unassailable superiority, a declaration to the world that the individual is above reproach, beyond criticism, and fundamentally better than those around them. It is crucial as we begin to distinguish arrogance from its healthier cousin, confidence. Confidence is quiet. It is born from genuine competence, from a history of achievement, and from an internal sense of self-worth that does not require external validation. It is a calm knowing. Arrogance, by contrast, is loud. It is performative. It is rooted not in self-worth, but in the desperate need for the appearance of worth. It must constantly be asserted, demonstrated, and defended for it is built upon a foundation of insecurity. The word itself, from the Latin arrogare, means to claim for oneself. The arrogant individual is claiming a status, a knowledge, or an importance that has not been earned or is not internally felt. They are seizing it, demanding it be recognized, because they fear that without this claim, they will be revealed as empty. The mechanism behind this behavior is one of compensation. Deep within the narcissistic structure lies a profound sense of inadequacy, a core of shame and worthlessness. This internal state is so painful, so intolerable, that the psyche constructs an elaborate defense against it. Arrogance is this defense made manifest. It operates on a simple, brutal logic. If I can establish my superiority, then I can enforce your inferiority. And if you are inferior, your opinions, your feelings, and your judgments are, by definition, less valuable than mine. They become insignificant. In this way, arrogance acts as a preemptive strike against potential narcissistic injury. It devalues others before they have a chance to devalue the narcissist. It is a psychological shield that deflects criticism by declaring the source of the criticism to be fundamentally flawed. In daily interaction, this mechanism reveals itself in a number of ways. You may observe it in the conversational monopolist, who speaks over others and redirects every topic back to their own experiences and accomplishments. You see it in the casual dismissal of another person's expertise, the subtle scoff or condescending tone used to undermine a differing viewpoint.
It is present in the chronic inability to admit fault or to apologize sincerely, as doing so would be an admission of imperfection, a crack in the fortress wall. The arrogant individual often presents themselves as an authority on all subjects, offering unsolicited advice and critiquing the choices of others, all to reinforce their own manufactured position at the top of a perceived hierarchy. But listen closely, and you will hear the faint echo of desperation behind the bravado. It is the sound of a defense mechanism working tirelessly, around the clock, to keep a terrifying inner truth at bay. This wall of arrogance, so imposing from the outside, is merely a shell. And as we drift deeper, we will begin to explore the vast, shadowed emptiness it was built to conceal.
Level 5. Superficial Charm. Welcome back. As we continue our gentle descent into the quiet depths of the mind, we leave the sunlit, surface-level awareness and drift downward. The waters here are still calm, clear, and deceptively warm. We are now arriving at level 5 of the Narcissism Iceberg, superficial charm. This is a trait that so often glimmers just below the surface, catching the light and drawing us in. It is, for many, the very first point of contact with a narcissistic personality structure. It is the polished exterior, the inviting smile, the masterfully crafted first impression that masks the vast, cold structure beneath. Let us begin by understanding what superficial charm truly is and how it differs from genuine warmth. Genuine warmth and charisma emanate from a place of authentic empathy and a sincere interest in others. It is a light that shines from within. Superficial charm, in contrast, is a manufactured light. It is a spotlight, skillfully aimed and operated, designed to illuminate the narcissist in the most favorable way possible, while simultaneously blinding you to what lies in the shadows. The mechanism of this charm is a fascinating study in human psychology. It is not born of emotion, but of astute observation and cognitive mimicry. The narcissist, often from a very early age, becomes a student of human behavior. They watch, they listen, and they learn what people want. They build a vast internal library of socially acceptable phrases, complimentary gestures, and humorous anecdotes. Their charm is not spontaneous, it is a meticulously curated repertoire, a script that has been rehearsed to perfection. This process often involves a technique known as mirroring. In the initial stages of an encounter, the narcissist will subtly reflect your own mannerisms, your speech patterns, your stated values, and your deepest desires back at you. If you are passionate about art, they will suddenly reveal a profound, lifelong appreciation for the great masters. If you value family above all else, they will speak with eloquent reverence about their own. This creates a powerful and immediate illusion of a deep connection, a sense of having found a kindred spirit, a soulmate. But it is an echo, not a shared voice. You are not falling in love with them, you are falling in love with a carefully crafted reflection of yourself. Historically, this concept has been recognized by clinicians for decades. In his seminal work on psychopathy, The Mask of Sanity, Dr. Hervey Cleckley described this very phenomenon, a flawless and appealing facade that conceals a profound lack of internal emotional substance.
While narcissism and psychopathy are distinct, they share this common territory of a performative, instrumental approach to social interaction. The charm is a tool, and its application is threefold. First, and most importantly, it is used to secure narcissistic supply. The admiration, attention, and validation of others are the psychological oxygen for the narcissist. Their charm is the most efficient method for obtaining it. A charming person is liked, admired, and sought after. Each compliment, each laugh they elicit, each person they win over serves as a confirmation of their grandiose self-image. Second, this charm is the primary engine of the idealization phase, often referred to as love bombing. It is used to quickly and intensely draw a person into their orbit. By presenting themselves as the perfect partner, friend, or colleague, they create a powerful initial bond. This intense, positive beginning serves as an anchor, making it much more difficult for the target to leave or to believe the negative reality when the mask inevitably begins to slip in later stages. And third, superficial charm is a crucial tool for public image management. The narcissist works tirelessly to cultivate a positive public reputation. This charming facade serves as a form of social insurance. Should a target ever try to expose their toxic behavior, they are often met with disbelief. "But he's so charming," friends will say. "She's always so lovely and kind." The polished exterior discredits the victim and isolates them, reinforcing the narcissist's control. So as we rest here at level 5, observe this shimmering, alluring surface. Understand it not as a reflection of inner goodness, but as a calculated, functional performance. It is the anesthetic administered before a painful procedure. It is the beautiful, inviting door to a house with no foundation. Acknowledge its power, its effectiveness, and its profound emptiness. Let this understanding settle into your mind, gently and without judgment. There is nothing more for you to analyze now. Simply allow this knowledge to be as you drift even deeper, past the shimmering light toward the quieter, truer depths that await below. Welcome. As we continue our gentle descent, we arrive at level 6 of the Narcissism Iceberg. Here, just beneath the most visible surface behaviors, we encounter a foundational element of the grandiose persona, the phenomenon of exaggerated achievements. Allow your mind to settle as we explore this fascinating and complex layer. At its core, the exaggeration of one's accomplishments is far more than simple boasting or telling a tall tale. It is a meticulous and often unconscious process of reality distortion. It is the art of taking a kernel of truth, a minor contribution to a successful project, a brief and unremarkable interaction with an influential person, a modest success in a past endeavor, and spinning it into a grand narrative of singular, heroic achievement. This is not merely lying for gain. It is the constant, effortful construction of a superior self, a self that must be perceived as exceptional, brilliant, and uniquely capable. To understand the mechanism, we must look deeper into the hollow core that this grandiosity is designed to protect. The narcissistic individual's internal world
is often characterized by a profound and terrifying sense of inadequacy. This feeling is so unbearable, so fundamentally threatening to their psychic structure, that a powerful defense must be erected against it. This defense is the false self, a carefully curated, idealized version of who they believe they ought to be. The exaggerated achievements are the bricks and mortar of this psychological fortress. Each embellished story, each inflated claim adds another layer of protection, distancing them further from the gnawing emptiness within. Consider the workplace. An individual at this level might describe their role in a team's success not as collaborative but as pivotal. They were not part of the team that landed the client. Rather, it was their unique insight, their single, brilliant idea shared at a critical moment that single-handedly saved the deal from the brink of failure. They will omit the contributions of others, not always out of malice, but because in the narrative of their false self, the contributions of others are irrelevant, mere background details in the story of their own triumph. The admiration they receive from this story is a potent form of narcissistic supply, the external validation that temporarily quiets the inner critic and reaffirms the reality of their grandiose persona. This behavior is distinct from healthy pride. A person with a stable sense of self can recount an achievement with accuracy, acknowledging challenges, luck, and the help of others. Their pride is grounded in reality. For the narcissist, the story is ungrounded.
It floats, untethered to objective facts, because its purpose is not to communicate a past event, but to regulate a present internal state. The story must be grand enough to quell the deep-seated fear of being average, of being unseen, of being insignificant. Consequently, when you listen to these narratives, you may notice a subtle lack of detail, a glossing over of the specific how in favor of the glorious what. The story feels more like a movie trailer than a documentary, all soaring highlights and dramatic conclusions with none of the mundane, collaborative work that underpins all genuine success. This is because the narrative is a performance, and the narcissist is both the lead actor and the sole screenwriter, revising history in real time to fit the needs of their fragile ego. As you rest, let this understanding settle. See this behavior not as a sign of strength or confidence, but as a compensatory strategy born of a deep and hidden vulnerability. It is a constant, exhausting performance designed to convince the world, and most importantly, themselves, that the magnificent reflection they see is real. And with that thought, allow your own mind to release the need for performance and simply be, as we drift deeper into the quiet, still waters of the iceberg. Level 7. Fantasies of unlimited success. As we gently descend from the more observable surface behaviors, we arrive now at level 7 of our exploration. Here, in the cooler, quieter depths just below the waterline, we encounter a foundational element of the narcissistic cognitive architecture: the preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success. This is not merely daydreaming. It is a core organizing principle of the self. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders lists this as one of the key criteria for a reason. It is the internal theater where the narcissist is the perpetual star, director, and sole audience member of a story of boundless achievement. Let us first distinguish this from healthy ambition. A healthy individual might aspire to success, power, or recognition. They may visualize achieving a goal to motivate themselves. However, this ambition is typically grounded in a realistic appraisal of one's abilities, the steps required, and the possibility of failure. It is connected to action and effort in the real world. The narcissistic fantasy, however, is a detached and self-contained reality. It is a compensatory mechanism, a soothing balm applied to the fragile ego. Within this internal world, there are no limits, no setbacks, no need for the arduous process of actual work. The success is already total, the power absolute,
the brilliance universally acknowledged, the beauty unparalleled, or the ideal love already perfected. It is the destination without the journey. From a psychodynamic perspective, these fantasies often originate in early developmental stages. The psychologist Heinz Kohut spoke of the need for a child to have their natural, healthy grandiosity mirrored by their caregivers. When a parent reflects a child's delight in their own abilities, it helps the child integrate this grandiosity into a stable and realistic sense of self. However, if this mirroring is absent, inconsistent, or excessive and unrealistic, the grandiose self can remain unintegrated. It becomes a brittle, secret self that must be protected at all costs. The fantasies are the private sanctuary where this grandiose self is allowed to live, breathe, and be worshipped, safe from the harsh judgments and limitations of external reality. The mechanism is one of emotional regulation. When faced with a narcissistic injury, a criticism, a failure, a slight, a moment of feeling ordinary, the individual retreats into this fantasy world. The external world has failed to provide the necessary admiration or narcissistic supply, so the mind generates it internally. In their imagination, they are the brilliant CEO confounding their rivals, the celebrated artist receiving a standing ovation, the intellectual giant whose insights change the world.
This fantasy provides a powerful, albeit temporary, restoration of their sense of specialness and superiority. It anesthetizes the pain of inadequacy. In application, this manifests as a profound disconnect between the individual's claims and their actual accomplishments. They may speak at length about grand projects they're about to start, revolutionary ideas they possess, or the incredible future that awaits them. Yet they may struggle with the mundane, concrete steps required to make any of it a reality. The fantasy is so satisfying, so complete, that the effort of real-world achievement seems crude and unnecessary. Why risk the messy possibility of failure when perfect success already exists, pristine and unchallenged, within the quiet theater of the mind? This preoccupation drains energy from tangible pursuits, trapping the individual in a cycle of grandiose planning and real-world inaction, a state of perpetual imagined potential. As we drift further down, we will see how this internal fantasy world dictates and demands certain behaviors in the external world, shaping the layers that lie in the deeper, colder darkness below.
Level 8. Belief in specialness. As our submersible exploration of the mind continues its slow, quiet descent, we leave the more turbulent surface waters behind. We are now entering a stratum of the iceberg where the core structures of the narcissistic personality begin to reveal themselves. Here at level 8, we encounter a foundational pillar, a belief system so integral that it supports much of what we observe at the surface. This is the profound and unwavering belief in specialness. This concept is far more complex than simple arrogance or high self-confidence. Healthy self-esteem is typically rooted in reality, in achievements, in positive feedback, and a balanced self-assessment. Confidence is the trust one has in one's abilities. The belief in specialness, however, is of a different quality entirely. It is an a priori conviction. It is not earned, it is not based on evidence. It is, for the narcissist, a fundamental, non-negotiable truth of their existence, as certain as the law of gravity. They do not believe they are special because of what they do. They believe they simply are special, and therefore whatever they do is inherently significant. This belief acts as the central organizing principle for their entire worldview. It is the lens through which they interpret every interaction, every event, and every relationship. From a psychoanalytic perspective, this can be understood as the persistence of an infantile, grandiose self. In healthy development, a child's natural feelings of being the center of the universe are gradually tempered by reality, by empathy, and by the recognition of others as separate, equally valid beings. For the narcissist, this developmental process is arrested. The grandiose self is not integrated,
but is instead preserved, walled off from the parts of the self that feel small, ashamed, or inadequate. The belief in specialness is the constant, reassuring whisper of this infantile self, a defense mechanism of the highest order. It serves to protect the fragile ego from the terrifying abyss of perceived mediocrity or worthlessness. It is the ornate gilded shield held up against the ordinary pains and limitations of the human condition. In practical application, this belief manifests in a pervasive sense of being an exception to every rule. The social contracts that bind the rest of humanity, waiting in line, adhering to deadlines, respecting boundaries, offering reciprocity, are viewed as guidelines for the masses, not for them. They move through the world with an invisible hall pass, genuinely believing that their needs, their time, and their desires are more important than those of others.
This is not necessarily born of conscious malice, but from a cognitive distortion so profound that the equal standing of others is simply not a computable reality. This core belief is the engine that powers the more visible trait of entitlement. Because they are special, they are inherently deserving of the best treatment, the most attention, and the admiration of others, without the need for commensurate effort or contribution. Their relationships are often structured around this principle. Others are not seen as partners in a shared journey, but as supporting characters in the grand narrative of their own special life, audiences, admirers, and facilitators. They may express confusion or even contempt for the common struggles of others, as these mundane problems are so far beneath the elevated plane on which they perceive themselves to exist. This is why they often feel misunderstood, like a visionary genius or a tragic hero whose unique sensitivities and profound insights are lost on a world of ordinary people. This narrative of the chosen one is not a mere fantasy, it is the very bedrock of their identity, the essential belief that holds the entire psychological structure together. As we drift deeper, we will see how this fundamental conviction informs even more hidden and complex aspects of the narcissistic mind. Welcome back. As we continue our descent, allow your mind to settle, to drift gently downwards with us, leaving the surface world behind. We arrive now at level 9 of the Narcissism Iceberg. Here, we encounter a behavior that is more externally visible, a construct built to be seen by the outside world, the intense focus on status symbols. At its core, a status symbol is an object, a title, or an affiliation that society has deemed a marker of success, wealth, power, or prestige. Throughout human history, societies have used such symbols to delineate social hierarchies, from the purple dyes of Roman senators to the sprawling estates of feudal lords. But for the narcissistic personality, the function of these symbols is not merely social. It is deeply, fundamentally psychological. It is a form of external life support for a fragile internal world. Let us first examine the mechanism at play. The psychic architecture of a narcissist is characterized by a profound and persistent internal void. There is a lack of stable intrinsic self-worth. Their sense of value is not generated from within. It must be imported, reflected, and validated from the outside. Status symbols become the perfect conduits for this external validation. A luxury car, a designer watch, a degree from a prestigious university, or a title on a business card are not simply possessions or achievements. They are tangible, irrefutable evidence presented to the world that says, I am important, I am successful, I am worthy of admiration. The symbol itself does the heavy lifting. The individual does not need to cultivate a personality of depth or demonstrate genuine competence. The brand, the title, or the affiliation speaks for them. They are, in a sense, borrowing an identity. They become the person who drives a Porsche, or the doctor from Harvard, or the one who lives in the gated community.
This borrowed identity feels more stable and more impressive than the fragmented, insecure self they feel within. The symbol becomes a shield, deflecting scrutiny from their true character and redirecting it toward a carefully curated, high-gloss facade. The application of this trait manifests in a pattern of acquisition and display. It is not enough to simply own the symbol, it must be seen. This is why the behavior is often ostentatious. The conversation will invariably be steered towards their new expensive purchase. The logo on their clothing will be prominently displayed. They will name-drop influential acquaintances or casually mention their exclusive memberships. Social media becomes a meticulously curated gallery of these symbols, a highlight reel of exotic vacations, fine dining, and material possessions, all designed to provoke envy and therefore admiration. This admiration is a crucial form of narcissistic supply. It is also important to recognize that status symbols for the narcissist extend beyond material objects. People can become status symbols. A physically attractive partner, the trophy wife or trophy husband, can be paraded as an accessory, another testament to the narcissist's superiority. Their children, too, may be pushed into high-achieving pursuits, not for the child's own fulfillment, but so the child's successes can be worn as a badge of honor by the narcissistic parent. But like any external fix, the validation provided by a status symbol is fleeting. The thrill of the acquisition fades, and the internal void remains. This necessitates a constant, escalating quest for the next, better symbol. The car must be upgraded. The house must be bigger. The next title must be more impressive. It is a perpetual motion machine of consumption, fueled by an insecurity that can never be satisfied. As we drift deeper, allow this understanding to settle. Level 9 is the point where the internal emptiness begins to build its own elaborate, external fortress, a glittering castle of brands, titles, and trophies built on a foundation of sand. It is a testament not to genuine success, but to the desperate need to project its image.
Level 10, Name Dropping. As we continue our descent, we arrive at level 10 of the Narcissism Iceberg. Here, just below the surface, we encounter a behavior that is both common and deeply revealing: name dropping. At first glance, it may seem like a minor social faux pas, a slightly clumsy attempt to impress, but within the framework of narcissism, it is a carefully, if sometimes unconsciously, deployed tool. It is a strategic act of psychological appropriation designed to bolster a fragile ego by borrowing the prestige of others. Let us first define the mechanism at play. Name dropping is the practice of casually mentioning important, famous, or influential people as if one knows them well, with the specific intent of impressing others and elevating one's own social standing. The core principle here is what psychologists refer to as basking in reflected glory. The narcissist, often lacking a stable and internally generated sense of self-worth, seeks to associate themselves with the perceived value of another. They are not merely sharing an interesting anecdote, they are attempting to create a psychological bridge, allowing the status and success of the named individual to flow back and illuminate them. It is an act of social alchemy, an attempt to turn association into substance. This behavior is not a modern invention. In the royal courts of Europe, proximity to the monarch was the ultimate currency. To be able to say one had spoken to the king or was a confidant of a powerful duke was to declare one's own importance. In the literary salons of the 19th century, name-dropping was a subtle art form, a way of signaling one's inclusion in the intellectual elite. Today, in the age of social media, the practice has been democratized and amplified. A tagged photo, a mentioned handle, a screenshot of a brief interaction all serve the same ancient purpose: to construct an identity by curating a collage of impressive associations. The application of name-dropping by a narcissist is often distinguished by its irrelevance and its insistence. The mention of the important person rarely serves to advance the narrative or illuminate a point. Instead, the narrative is a vehicle for the name. Consider the difference. A film historian might say, "When I interviewed Martin Scorsese, he explained his use of the color red to symbolize guilt." Here the name serves the context. The narcissist, however, might say, "I was running late to my meeting, which is so typical for me. It reminds me of the time Martin Scorsese told me he's always losing his keys." The story is a flimsy excuse, a stage built solely for the celebrity cameo. The goal is not to share information, but to transmit status. This act reveals the profound externality of the narcissist's self-esteem.
Their sense of value is not a wellspring from within, but a reservoir that must be constantly filled from outside sources. They believe that greatness is contagious, that by merely touching the hem of a powerful person's garment, some of that power will be transferred to them. It is a performance for an audience, but most critically, it is a performance for themselves. Each dropped name is another brick in the facade of the grandiose self, a facade that hides the deep-seated insecurity and emptiness beneath the surface. As we rest here at level 10, observe this behavior not as simple bragging, but as a desperate and continuous effort to validate an existence that feels, to its owner, fundamentally invalid without the reflection of someone else's light. Lack of empathy. As we continue our descent, leaving the surface-level observations behind, we now arrive at level 11. Here, we encounter one of the most fundamental and defining characteristics of the narcissistic structure: the profound lack of empathy. If the traits we have discussed so far are the visible, sharp edges of the iceberg, this is the vast, cold, and solid mass of ice just beneath the waterline that gives those edges their form and rigidity. Empathy, in its fullest sense, is a complex human capacity. It is often broken down into two primary components. First, there is cognitive empathy, the ability to understand another person's perspective, to intellectually grasp what they might be thinking or feeling. It is the capacity to, as they say, walk a mile in another's shoes. The second component is affective, or emotional empathy. This is the ability to actually feel what another person is feeling, to share in their emotional state. It is the resonance, the vibration you feel in your own heart when you witness another's joy or sorrow. The lack of empathy in a narcissistic individual is primarily a deficit in this second form, the affective, emotional empathy. It is not that they are always incapable of understanding that you are sad or angry or happy. In fact, many individuals with strong narcissistic traits develop a very keen cognitive empathy. They can be excellent readers of people, able to predict their reactions and understand their motivations. But this understanding is used as a tool, like a scientist studying an organism. They gather data not to connect, but to manipulate, to anticipate, to control the outcome of an interaction for their own benefit. The affective channel, however, is muted. It is a hollow space. When you express deep sadness to them, they may cognitively register the information. This person is sad. The appropriate response is X. But they do not feel the echo of your sadness within themselves. Your pain does not cause them pain. Your joy does not spark their joy. It is as if they are watching a film in a foreign language with the subtitles on. They can follow the plot, but they miss the poetry, the emotional nuance, the soul of the experience. The mechanism behind this is believed to be developmental. In early childhood, empathy is cultivated through secure attachment and mirroring from a caregiver. A child cries, and a loving parent reflects that distress, soothes it, and in doing so teaches the child that their feelings are real, valid, and shared. This shared emotional space is the fertile ground where affective empathy grows.
When this process is disrupted through neglect, abuse, or being valued only for one's performance, The child may learn to wall off their own vulnerable feelings to survive. In building this wall, this false self, they inadvertently sever the very connections that would allow them to feel for others. The capacity for shared emotion simply does not develop. It atrophies from disuse. In application, this lack of empathy is devastating for those in a relationship with the narcissist. It is why they can say something incredibly cruel and be genuinely perplexed when you are wounded. They are not feigning ignorance. They truly cannot compute the emotional impact of their words because they cannot feel it themselves. It is why they can move on so quickly from a relationship that you are still mourning. There is no shared emotional bond to break. It is why they cannot truly celebrate your successes, because your joy is not a shared experience for them, but rather a data point that either serves their image or threatens their own sense of superiority. This is the cold, quiet truth of level 11. It is not an active malice, though it results in great harm. It is a void, an inability to connect to the fundamental, shared humanity that binds us all together through feeling. As you rest, allow this understanding to settle. It is a difficult concept, but seeing it clearly is essential as we prepare to drift even deeper into the architecture of this complex personality structure.
Level 12, exploitative behavior. As we descend now past the more superficial layers of the narcissism iceberg, we arrive at level 12. Here, the water grows colder, the pressure increases, and the behaviors we observe become less about mere self-absorption and more about the direct, calculated use of others. We have reached the level of exploitative behavior. This is a cornerstone trait in the narcissistic personality structure, a behavior that flows directly from the core deficits we have begun to explore. To exploit in this context is to use another person as a means to an end without regard for their feelings, needs, or well-being. It is the instrumentalization of human relationships. Where a healthy individual sees a friend, a partner, or a colleague, the narcissist sees a resource, a tool, or an appliance designed to serve a specific function. The mechanism behind this behavior is not born of simple selfishness, which can be an occasional human failing. Rather, it is a complex and deeply ingrained pathology. It begins with the profound lack of empathy that characterizes the disorder. Without the internal wiring to genuinely feel or comprehend the emotional state of another, the act of using them does not register as a moral transgression. It is a purely logical, transactional process. If you cannot feel the discomfort, hurt, or betrayal you are causing another, there is no internal governor, no psychological brake to prevent you from doing so. This is then compounded by the powerful sense of entitlement we have previously discussed. The narcissist operates from a core belief that they are special and deserving of whatever they want. Therefore, when they take your time, your money, your ideas, or your emotional energy, their internal narrative is not one of theft, but of collection. They are simply taking what is owed to them, what the world should have provided them in the first place. This belief system serves as a powerful rationalization, neutralizing any potential for guilt or shame before it can even form. In a professional setting, this behavior manifests as taking credit for a subordinate's work, manipulating a colleague into shouldering an unfair burden, or using a professional connection to secure an advantage before promptly discarding the relationship once it has served its purpose. In personal relationships, it is even more insidious. It can be the friend who only appears when they need a loan or a favor, vanishing the moment their need is met. It can be the romantic partner who expects their significant other to finance their lifestyle, abandon their own ambitions, and serve as a perpetual emotional support system, all without a shred of reciprocation.
The relationship is not a partnership, it is a proprietorship, and the other person is an asset to be leveraged. Historically, psychoanalytic theory offers a lens through which to understand this. Thinkers like Otto Kernberg explored the concept of
object relations, which posits that our ability to relate to others is shaped by our earliest experiences. For a healthy individual, others are perceived as whole objects, complex beings with their own thoughts, feelings, and independent existence. For the narcissist, others are often perceived as part objects. They are not seen as a whole person, but as a function. The person who provides praise, the person who provides money, the person who provides status. When that function is no longer needed, the part object itself becomes irrelevant and can be discarded without a second thought. Exploitative behavior is, therefore, not an isolated act, but a fundamental worldview. It is the logical outcome when a grandiose sense of self, a profound lack of empathy, and an insatiable need for supply converge. It is the point on the iceberg where the narcissist's internal reality begins to inflict direct, tangible, and often devastating costs on the people around them. It is a cold and calculated strategy for survival, built on the premise that other people are not fellow travelers in life, but merely stepping stones on their path.
Level 13. Envy of others. As we descend past the more superficial layers of observable behavior, we arrive now at level 13 of our exploration. Here, in the cold, deep waters, we encounter a fundamental and corrosive force that shapes much of the narcissistic landscape, an endemic envy of others. This is not the common fleeting envy that you or I might experience, a momentary wish for a colleague's promotion or a friend's good fortune, an emotion that can often serve as a catalyst for our own growth. No. The envy that resides at this level of the iceberg is of a different nature entirely. It is a core structural component of the personality, a constant gnawing ache that informs the narcissist's perception of the world. To understand this, we must first differentiate between jealousy and envy. Jealousy is, at its heart, a fear of losing something you possess. Envy, conversely, is the painful feeling of wanting something that someone else possesses. For the narcissist, this feeling is magnified to an almost unbearable degree. Their entire self-concept is a fragile, grandiose construct, built to defend against a profound, underlying sense of worthlessness. When they see another person possessing qualities, achievements, or possessions they lack, it is not merely an observation, it is a direct and painful confirmation of their own perceived inadequacy. It is a narcissistic injury. The world, as viewed from this level of the psyche, is a zero-sum game. There is a finite amount of success, admiration, and happiness available, and every portion that is held by another is a portion that has been stolen from them. Another person's light does not simply illuminate the room, it casts a harsh, revealing shadow upon the narcissist's own perceived emptiness. This is why their envy is so often malignant. The primary impulse is not to attain what the other person has, but rather to spoil it, to devalue it, or to destroy it, so that the painful comparison can no longer be made. From a psychoanalytic perspective, particularly through the lens of object relations theorist Melanie Klein, this kind of primitive envy is one of the earliest and most destructive emotions. Klein theorized that an infant might feel envy towards the mother's breast, not just because it provides nourishment, but because it is a source of goodness in life that is outside of the infant's control. The impulse, she suggested, is to attack and spoil this good object out of sheer frustration and rage at its separateness and its power. This primitive dynamic is replayed throughout the narcissist's life.
The mechanism for managing this intolerable feeling is often projection and devaluation. If a colleague receives praise for a project, the narcissist will not think, "I wish I had received that praise." Instead, the internal monologue is one of dismissal. The boss is just playing favorites, or the project wasn't even that impressive. I could have done it better in half the time. They must tarnish the achievement to soothe the wound of their own envy. They might subtly sabotage a friend's new relationship by pointing out flaws in their partner, or belittle someone's creative passion as a childish hobby. This is not simple cruelty.
It is a desperate act of psychic self-preservation. By spoiling the goodness in others, they attempt to level the playing field, creating a world as barren and disappointing as they feel internally. This pervasive envy is why the narcissist can rarely, if ever, feel genuine happiness for another's success. To celebrate someone else is to acknowledge their value. And in the narcissist's binary world, acknowledging another's value inherently diminishes their own. So they will offer backhanded compliments, change the subject, or respond to good news with a story of their own, far grander success. This level of the iceberg, this cold current of envy, is a state of perpetual low-grade suffering, a lens that colors every interaction and ensures that they remain forever isolated, unable to share in the simple, connective joy of the human experience. As we drift past this desolate stratum, we can feel the profound solitude it creates, a chill that radiates upwards, influencing all the behaviors we see at the surface. Contempt for others. As we descend now gently to the 14th level of our iceberg, we encounter a feature that is not merely cold, but corrosive. Here at level 14, we find contempt for others. This is a particularly significant layer as it represents one of the most potent and destructive emotional states within the narcissistic framework. It is more than simple anger, which is a hot and often fleeting emotion. It is more than mere dislike. Contempt is a cold, calculated judgment. It is the profound sense of moral, intellectual, or existential superiority over another person. It is the psychological act of placing someone in a category beneath oneself, rendering them worthless, pathetic, or deserving of scorn. To understand the mechanism of contempt, we must return to the core wound of the narcissist. Their grandiose self-image is a fragile construct, a psychological scaffolding built to protect an incredibly vulnerable and insecure core. To maintain this structure, they must constantly validate their own superiority. One of the most efficient ways to do this is not by elevating themselves, but by devaluing everyone else. Contempt is the tool for this devaluation. It is a defense mechanism known in psychodynamic theory as splitting, where the world is starkly divided into all good and all bad. The narcissist, of course, resides in the all good category, and anyone who threatens their ego, disagrees with them, or simply exists in a way they disapprove of is cast into the all bad, contemptible category. They project their own deeply buried feelings of worthlessness onto their target. In scorning another, they are attempting to expel the very shame they cannot tolerate within themselves. We can observe the manifestations of contempt in a variety of ways, both subtle and overt. It is in the slight curl of the lip, this dismissive sneer that flashes for just a moment. It is in the rolling of the eyes when another person is speaking. It is in the condescending tone of voice, the one that feigns patience while communicating utter disdain for the other's intelligence. It is present in cynical humor, sarcasm that isn't meant to be playful but to wound, and backhanded compliments that serve only to highlight a perceived flaw. You might see it in the way they treat service staff, a waiter, a cashier, a janitor, as if they are not fully human, but mere functions to be commanded. They will dismiss others' accomplishments as lucky or easy, and belittle their passions as childish or a waste of time. Any opinion that deviates from their own is not just different, it is stupid, naive, or contemptible.
John Gutman, a renowned relationship expert, after studying thousands of couples, Gutman identified what he called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in relationships, 4 communication styles that are catastrophic predictors of divorce. These are criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. Of these 4, Gutman found contempt to be by far the single greatest predictor of relationship failure. He calls it sulfuric acid for love. It is the most poisonous of all relationship dynamics because it communicates utter disgust. It moves beyond criticism of a specific behavior and becomes an attack on the very character and being of the other person. When contempt enters the dynamic,
There is no longer a partnership of equals. There is a hierarchy of worth, and the foundation of respect has crumbled into dust. And so, as we leave this chilling level, we understand that contempt is not a sign of strength or genuine superiority. It is the opposite. It is the clearest possible signal of a deeply fractured and insecure ego, an ego that can only feel tall by standing on the perceived wreckage of others. It is a poison that the narcissist aims outward, but which ultimately corrodes their own capacity for genuine connection, empathy, and peace.
Level 15. Monopolizing Conversations. Welcome back. As we continue our descent, we leave behind the more superficial layers of the iceberg and begin to examine behaviors that shape the very structure of interpersonal dynamics. Let us now settle our minds and turn our attention to level 15, monopolizing conversations. At first glance, this trait may seem common, perhaps even innocuous, the sign of an enthusiastic extrovert or a passionate storyteller. But as we look closer, through the lens of narcissism, we see that conversational monopolization is not merely a habit, but a mechanism. It is a carefully, if subconsciously, managed performance designed to control the flow of attention, validation, and power. A healthy conversation is a delicate dance of reciprocity. It is a shared space where ideas are exchanged, experiences are validated, and connections are forged. It involves both speaking and, just as importantly, active listening. For the individual with narcissistic tendencies, however, a conversation is not a dance. It is a stage for a one-person show. The other person is not a partner, but an audience member, present only to applaud, to react, and to provide the energy upon which the narcissist feeds. This energy is, of course, narcissistic supply. The mechanism is multifaceted. The most overt form is simply filibustering, talking at length without pause, ignoring social cues that the other person wishes to speak, and filling every available silence with the sound of their own voice. Their stories are often embellished, filled with grandiosity, positioning them as the hero, the victim, or the uniquely insightful observer in every narrative. But the monopolization is often more subtle and therefore more insidious. Consider the technique of conversational hijacking. You begin to share a personal experience, perhaps a challenge you faced at work. The narcissist will listen just long enough to identify a key word, a hook on which they can hang their own, far more dramatic or important story. They might say, "That sounds tough. It reminds me of the time I had to deal with an impossible project, and let me tell you, no one could have handled it the way I did." Your experience is not validated, it is simply used as a launch pad to redirect the spotlight back onto them. Another common tactic is one-upmanship. If you mention a vacation you enjoyed, they will immediately describe a more exotic, more luxurious, or more culturally significant trip they once took. If you express pride in an accomplishment, they will counter with a greater one of their own. This is not about sharing in your joy, it is about reestablishing a hierarchy in which they remain firmly at the top. The conversation becomes a silent competition that you are not aware you had entered, and one you are not permitted to win. At its core, this behavior stems from a profound lack of genuine empathy and curiosity. The narcissist does not see other people as complex individuals with their own rich inner worlds. Instead, they see them as objects or mirrors whose purpose is to reflect back a grandiose image of themselves. They are not interested in your feelings, your perspective, or your story, unless it can be used to serve their own narrative. To listen, truly listen, would be to acknowledge that another person's experience is as valid and important as their own, a concept that is fundamentally threatening to their fragile sense of superiority.
The impact on the other person is a slow, quiet erosion of self. To be consistently on the receiving end of this conversational dominance is to feel unheard, unimportant, and invisible. You may begin to question if your own experiences are interesting or valid. You may find yourself becoming more and more silent in their presence, having learned that any attempt to contribute will be deflected, interrupted, or overshadowed. The connection feels hollow because a true connection cannot be built on a monologue. It is a draining and deeply lonely experience. So, as we let this understanding settle, observe this phenomenon not as simple talkativeness, but as a strategic control of relational space. It is the sound of an ego demanding to be the only voice in the room, a desperate attempt to fill a profound inner emptiness with the noise of its own performance. As we drift deeper now, we will see how this need for control extends far beyond the spoken word.
Impatience and irritability. As we continue our gentle descent, we arrive at level 16 of the Narcissism Iceberg. Here, we encounter a pair of traits that are frequently observable on the surface, often acting as the first visible cracks in the carefully constructed facade: impatience and irritability. While all human beings experience these emotions, in the context of narcissism, they are not merely fleeting reactions to circumstance. Instead, they are chronic, pervasive, and deeply rooted in the core mechanics of the personality structure. To the outside observer, this may manifest as a constant low-grade agitation, a person who seems perpetually on edge, easily provoked by the smallest of inconveniences, a driver who lays on the horn the microsecond a light turns green, a diner who speaks with cutting condescension to a server over a minor error, a colleague who sighs dramatically when a question is asked during a presentation. These are not just signs of a bad day, they are the audible static of a profound internal dysregulation. The mechanism behind this heightened irritability is multifaceted. At its heart lies a profound sense of entitlement. The individual with strong narcissistic traits operates from the unspoken and often unconscious belief that the world should bend to their will. Their time is more valuable, their needs are more urgent, and their path should be cleared of all obstacles. When reality inevitably fails to conform to this grandiose expectation, when there is traffic, a queue at the bank, or a slow internet connection, it is not perceived as a simple, neutral annoyance. It is perceived as a personal affront. It is a violation of the way things ought to be. And this violation feels deeply unjust and insulting. This connects directly to an intense need for control. The world, in their view, is a stage upon which their script should be flawlessly executed. Other people are merely supporting actors, expected to know their lines and hit their marks. When another person acts with their own agency, taking too long to tell a story, having a different opinion, or simply making a human error, they are deviating from the narcissist's script. This deviation represents a loss of control, which is an intolerable state for an ego built on a foundation of perceived omnipotence. The resulting irritability is a desperate attempt to force the world and the people in it back into their designated roles. Furthermore, this impatience is fueled by a fundamental lack of empathy. The narcissist has significant difficulty placing themselves in the shoes of another. The slow cashier isn't a new employee struggling to learn the system, they're an obstacle.
The person asking for clarification isn't trying to understand. They are deliberately wasting time. This inability to consider the valid experiences, feelings, and limitations of others means there is no buffer, no cognitive space for patience or grace. There is only their own internal experience of being thwarted, which immediately ignites into frustration. This chronic state of agitation serves as a protective barrier for an exquisitely fragile ego. The grandiosity of the narcissist is a defense against deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. Therefore, any event that suggests they are not special, not all-powerful, or not the center of the universe can trigger a narcissistic injury. Waiting in line is a potent reminder that they are, in fact, just like everyone else, a notion their entire psychological structure is designed to reject. The resulting irritability is the ego's defense system flaring up, an aggressive pushback against the encroaching, intolerable reality of their own ordinariness. So, as you rest, let this understanding settle. See this impatience not as a simple character flaw, but as the external expression of an internal world defined by entitlement, a desperate need for control, and a constant, exhausting battle to protect a fragile sense of self from the simple, everyday truths of a world that will not and cannot revolve around a single person.
Level 17, poor listening skills. As we descend now to level 17 of our iceberg, we encounter a trait that is often one of the first and most consistent indicators of a narcissistic relational style: poor listening skills. This is not the simple absent-minded distraction that we all experience from time to time. Rather, it is a fundamental structural component of the narcissistic psyche. It is a form of listening that is not designed for connection or understanding, but for control and self-regulation. To the narcissist, a conversation is rarely a reciprocal exchange of ideas and feelings, a bridge between two separate minds. Instead, it is a competitive arena, a stage for a monologue, or an opportunity to forage for narcissistic supply. Their listening is, therefore, highly functional and deeply filtered through the lens of their own needs. They are not listening to you, they are listening for what you can do for them in that moment. They are scanning your words for an entry point, a cue to begin their own performance, or a perceived slight that requires a defensive reaction. This phenomenon can be understood through the concept of conversational narcissism, a term coined by sociologist Charles Derber. It describes the tendency to consistently turn the conversation back to oneself. While most people engage in this behavior occasionally, for the narcissist, it is the default mode of communication. Imagine you are sharing a difficult experience from your day. Before you have even finished your second sentence, they might interrupt with, "That's nothing. Let me tell you what happened to me." The focus is immediately hijacked. Your experience is not validated or explored. It is merely used as a launch pad for their own more important, more dramatic narrative. The underlying mechanism for this is a profound lack of empathy and an unstable sense of self. To truly listen, to hold space for another person's reality, their emotions, and their perspective requires one to temporarily set aside their own ego. This is an intolerable, even terrifying prospect for the narcissist. Their grandiose self-concept is so fragile that it must be constantly reinforced. Allowing another person's experience to take center stage, even for a moment, feels like a threat, a diminishment of their own existence. They cannot afford to truly hear you, because to do so would be to acknowledge you as a separate and equally valid center of consciousness, which challenges their unspoken belief that they are the protagonist of reality itself. This manifests in several distinct ways. There is, of course, the constant interruption and the conversational redirect, but there is also a more subtle form, the vacant stare.
You may be speaking about something deeply important to you, and you will notice their eyes glaze over. Their focus has drifted. They are not processing your words. They are waiting for you to stop talking so they can resume control of the interaction. They may offer a generic, rehearsed response like, "That's crazy," or "Wow," without any genuine engagement. A conversational placeholder to feign participation. Another manifestation is selective hearing. The narcissist will often appear to have a flawless memory for any perceived criticism or any comment that can be twisted to support their victimhood. Yet they will have a stunningly poor memory for promises they made, your personal triumphs, or details about your life that you have shared multiple times.
Information that does not serve their ego is simply not encoded. It is deemed irrelevant and discarded by their cognitive filters. When you share a problem, they do not listen to empathize. They listen in order to provide a quick, often condescending solution that showcases their superiority. Once they have delivered their verdict, their interest evaporates. Your ongoing emotional process is of no concern. The cumulative effect of this constant invalidation is profoundly erosive. To be in a relationship where you are chronically unheard is to be rendered invisible. It fosters a deep sense of loneliness and self-doubt, as your own reality is never reflected back to you. At level 17, this poor listening is more than a bad habit. It is a defensive wall and an offensive weapon, ensuring the narcissist remains firmly at the center of their own universe, a universe in which all other voices are merely background noise.
Inability to take criticism. As we drift deeper, leaving the surface waters behind, we arrive at level 18 of our exploration. Here, we encounter a foundational pillar of the narcissistic structure, the profound and often absolute inability to accept criticism. This is not mere sensitivity or a simple dislike of being corrected. For the narcissist, criticism is not feedback. It is a declaration of war on their very existence. To understand this phenomenon, we must first revisit the core paradox of narcissism. The grandiose, often arrogant exterior is a meticulously constructed fortress built to protect an incredibly fragile and unstable sense of self. This self is not solid, but hollow, dependent on external validation, what is known as narcissistic supply, for its very shape and form. When criticism arrives, no matter how gentle, constructive, or valid, it is perceived as a siege weapon breaching the walls of this fortress. It threatens to expose the emptiness within, a terror the narcissist cannot consciously face. From a psychodynamic perspective, this reaction is often termed a narcissistic injury. The psychoanalyst Heinz Kohut theorized that for a healthy self to develop, a child requires mirroring and validation from caregivers. When this is deficient or inconsistent, the individual may fail to develop an internal, stable sense of self-worth. They are left, in a sense, perpetually seeking that perfect reflection from the outside world. Criticism is therefore like a crack in the mirror. It does not just show a flaw, it shatters the entire reflection, revealing the void they have spent a lifetime trying to conceal. The mechanism by which the narcissist defends against this injury is multifaceted. The first and most common response is outright denial and deflection. The criticism cannot be true because if it were, their entire self-concept would collapse. Therefore, the fault must lie not with them, but with the person delivering the feedback. This is where we see the immediate activation of projection. The critic is accused of being the very thing they are pointing out. If they are called lazy, they will counter that the other person is the true slacker. If they are called inconsiderate, they will launch into a tirade about the other's selfishness. The criticism is treated like a hot coal, immediately tossed onto someone else before it can burn them.
Second, it is a powerful emotional anesthetic. The sheer intensity of the rage floods their system, drowning out the painful feelings of shame and inadequacy that the criticism has triggered. In more covert presentations, the response may not be explosive rage, but rather a cold, calculated campaign of devaluation. This can manifest as gaslighting, convincing the critic that they are too sensitive, crazy, or that they misunderstood the situation entirely. It can also be the silent treatment, a form of stonewalling that emotionally excommunicates the offender. The message is clear. The price for offering criticism is the withdrawal of all affection and connection. You will be erased for your transgression. In a professional setting, this might look like a manager who, upon having a small error pointed out in a report, systematically undermines or even fires the employee who found it. In a personal relationship, it is the partner who, when asked to help more around the house, interprets it as a fundamental assault on their character and launches into a tirade about all the ways their partner is ungrateful and demanding. The initial simple request is lost in the furious defensive smokescreen. Ultimately, this inability to internalize feedback, even when it is helpful,
creates a tragic static loop. Without the ability to self-reflect and accept critique, genuine growth is impossible. The narcissist is trapped in their own fortress, repelling anyone who might help them repair the foundations, destined to repeat the same mistakes while blaming the entire world for the cracks that inevitably appear.
Level 19. Sense of superiority. As we continue our calm and quiet descent, we arrive at level 19 of our exploration. Here, just beneath the more turbulent surface waters of overt behaviors, we find a foundational pillar of the narcissistic structure, the pervasive sense of superiority. Allow your mind to gently focus on this concept as we illuminate its intricate nature. This sense of superiority is not to be confused with healthy self-esteem or genuine confidence. True self-confidence is an internal state of being. It is quiet, resilient, and allows for the acknowledgement of flaws and the celebration of others' successes without feeling diminished. It is a deeply rooted tree, drawing strength from within, flexible enough to bend without breaking. The narcissistic sense of superiority, in contrast, is a brittle and performative construct. It is a skyscraper built on a foundation of sand. From a distance, it appears imposing, impressive, and solid, but its entire existence is predicated on external validation and, most importantly, on the perceived inferiority of others. It is not a feeling of being good, but a desperate need to be better than. To understand its mechanism, we must look deeper into the cold, dark waters of the psyche. This sense of superiority is, in its essence, a powerful and elaborate defense mechanism. It is a psychological overcompensation for a profound, often unconscious, and utterly terrifying feeling of inferiority. The psychoanalyst Alfred Adler was one of the first to articulate this dynamic, coining the term superiority complex to describe the very process of masking a deep-seated inferiority complex. Somewhere in the individual's early development, a core wound was inflicted, a feeling of being fundamentally flawed, unseen, or inadequate. To consciously experience this wound would be annihilating to the ego, and so the mind, in a desperate act of self-preservation, constructs its opposite. It creates a grandiose false self, a character who is not just adequate but exceptional, not just seen but admired, not just good but perfect. The sense of superiority is the constant running monologue of this false self. It is the fuel that keeps the illusion alive. This is why the sense of superiority is so fragile and requires constant maintenance. It manifests in a myriad of subtle and overt ways. In conversation, it appears as the compulsive need to correct, to one-up, to finish others' sentences, or to dismiss their experiences as less significant. It is the subtle condescension in the tone of voice, the patronizing smile, the unsolicited advice given from a presumed position of greater knowledge or life experience.
This individual moves through the world with an invisible, yet rigidly defined hierarchy in their mind. They are, by default, at the apex. Therefore, rules, social norms, and expectations that apply to the common person are seen as suggestions at best, and at worst, as inconvenient obstacles to be ignored. They believe they possess a unique insight, a special understanding of the world that others simply lack. Any challenge to this worldview, any suggestion that they might be wrong, is not met with curiosity, but with indignation, contempt, or rage. The prospect of being incorrect is not merely an error to be corrected, but a profound existential threat, as it risks cracking the very facade that holds the terrifying feelings of worthlessness at bay. So as we observe this level, let us understand the sense of superiority not as a statement of genuine strength, but as the echo of a profound and hidden pain. It is the loud defensive roar of a psyche terrified of its own perceived smallness. The more pronounced the arrogance, the more desperate the need to project an image of being above it all, the deeper and more fragile the insecurities that lie beneath. Let this understanding settle in your mind, a quiet truth in the stillness of our journey. The imposing skyscraper is but a hollow shell, its grandiosity a measure of its emptiness. As you continue to relax,
Allow this knowledge to soften your focus, letting the currents of sleep gently pull you further down into the deeper, quieter levels that await.
Overt self-praise. Welcome. As we continue our descent, we now arrive at level 20 of the Narcissism Iceberg. The water here is still quite clear, the sunlight from the surface easily reaching these depths. Here, we encounter a behavior that is unambiguous, direct, and foundational to the grandiose narcissistic presentation: overt self-praise. Unlike the more subtle manipulations that may lie in the darker waters below, overt self-praise is an explicit, unvarnished broadcast of one's own perceived excellence. It is not the humble brag, nor is it the quiet confidence of genuine self-esteem. It is, in its purest form, a declarative statement of superiority, offered without invitation and often without context. Think of the colleague who, in the middle of a team meeting, announces, "Frankly, no one understands this market better than I do." Or the acquaintance at a dinner party who steers every conversation back to their own remarkable achievements, their unparalleled intellect, or their unique and profound experiences. To understand its mechanism, we must first look to its roots, which are as old as the myth of Narcissus himself. Narcissus did not just admire his reflection, he fell in love with it, vocalizing his adoration. This is the archetype of overt self-praise, the externalization of an internal, desperate self-infatuation. The psychological engine driving this behavior is twofold. First, it is a direct and often clumsy attempt to solicit narcissistic supply. The individual lays their greatness on the table, expecting, or rather demanding, that others see it, acknowledge it, and validate it. The statement, "I am brilliant," is a hook, and the hoped-for response is, "Yes, you are brilliant." This external validation is required to momentarily patch the leaks in a deeply precarious sense of self-worth. This brings us to the second, more critical mechanism: the regulation of a fragile internal state. The grand, imposing edifice of the narcissist's ego is often built on unstable foundations. Beneath the loud proclamations of genius and success lies a profound emptiness, or gnawing sense of inadequacy. Overt self-praise is therefore not just a performance for others, it is a performance for the self. It is a form of self-hypnosis, an incantation repeated to ward off the haunting whispers of self-doubt. By saying the words aloud, by forcing them into the shared reality of a social space, the narcissist attempts to make them more real, to solidify a self-concept that they secretly fear is made of sand. In the theater of everyday life, this behavior manifests in various ways. It can be found in the constant recounting of past glories, where every story has the same protagonist and the same triumphant ending.
It can be seen in the dismissal of others' accomplishments as minor or derivative compared to their own. In the digital age, social media has become a vast echo chamber for overt self-praise, a curated gallery of personal triumphs, accompanied by captions that leave no room for interpretation. It is important to distinguish this from healthy pride. A person with stable self-esteem might share a success with loved ones, feeling a genuine sense of accomplishment and a desire to connect. For the narcissist at this level, the sharing is not about connection. It is about establishing hierarchy. The goal is not to share joy, but to assert dominance. The listener is not a confidant, but an audience. Their role is to applaud, to be impressed, to be slightly intimidated. And so, here at level 20, we observe this bright, loud, and often socially alienating behavior. It is the part of the iceberg that gleams in the sun, demanding attention. It is a fortress wall, built of words, designed to look impenetrable. But as we prepare to descend further, we must remember the nature of fortresses. They are built to protect something vulnerable within. And it is that vulnerability, hidden in the darker, colder depths, that we will continue to explore. For now, simply observe this performance of self-praise. Notice its cadence, its insistence.
its desperate need for an echo, and let the sound of it fade as we drift deeper. Allow the quiet hum of the room to settle around you. Let your breathing find its own gentle rhythm, in and out. We are moving deeper now, below the surface level behaviors, into the more intricate and often invisible mechanics of manipulation. Here, at level 21, we encounter a term that has entered the popular lexicon, yet whose true chilling nature is often misunderstood. We arrive at gaslighting. Before it was a buzzword, it was a whisper in a darkened room, a subtle distortion of reality designed to make a person question their own mind. The term itself originates not from a psychology textbook, but from the stage. The 1938 play, Gaslight, and its more famous 1944 film adaptation gave us the perfect metaphor for this insidious form of psychological abuse. In the story, a husband systematically manipulates his wife into believing she is going insane. He subtly dims the gas-powered lights in their home, but when she points it out, he insists that it's all in her head, that she is imagining the flicker, the dimming. He hides objects and then convinces her she has lost them. He orchestrates strange noises and then denies their existence. The goal is not merely to lie, but to dismantle her reality, to erase her trust in her own senses until she becomes completely dependent on his version of the world. This is the essence of gaslighting. It is not simply lying or disagreeing. It is a deliberate and systematic campaign to erode another person's perception of reality. The gaslighter becomes the sole arbiter of truth. The victim's memory is faulty, their emotions are invalid, their perceptions are unreliable. It is a slow, creeping fog that envelops the victim's mind, isolating them in a world of confusion and self-doubt. The mechanism of gaslighting operates on a few key principles. First, there is outright denial. The gaslighter will state with unwavering conviction, "That never happened," or "I never said that," even in the face of clear evidence. This bold-faced denial is designed to be jarring, to make you question the very memory you hold. Second, there's the questioning of your emotional stability. Phrases like, "You're being too sensitive," or "You're overreacting," are not criticisms of your behavior, but attacks on your right to feel. They reframe your valid emotional response as a symptom of instability. And third, there is the slow erosion of your support system. The gaslighter will often tell you that your friends or family agree that you are unwell or difficult, creating a sense of total isolation. If everyone thinks you're the problem, you begin to believe it yourself. For the narcissist, gaslighting is not merely a tactic. It is a fundamental tool for survival. It serves three critical functions. Firstly, it provides absolute control. By becoming the author of your reality, the narcissist ensures you are dependent on them for your sense of self and your understanding of the world. You stop trusting your own internal compass and look to them for direction. Secondly, it is the ultimate shield against accountability. If a narcissist's behavior is challenged, they can simply rewrite the event. It wasn't that they were cruel, it was that you were making things up or remembering it wrong. The focus shifts from their action to your supposed instability. And finally, it protects their fragile ego, their grandiose false self. The narcissist's worldview cannot tolerate a reality in which they are flawed or have made a mistake. By convincing you that your reality is the one that's broken, their own delusion can remain perfectly intact. Gaslighting is the dimming of the lights in your own mind, done so slowly you barely notice, until one day you find yourself in complete darkness, unable to trust the evidence of your own eyes. It is the quiet voice that whispers, "You are not a reliable narrator of your own life." As you rest here, in the safety of this space, simply observe this concept. Acknowledge its weight, its insidious power. Understanding the mechanism is the first step to relighting the lamps, to trust in your own perceptions once more. For now, Let this knowledge settle and allow your mind to be still. Rest.
Level 22. Welcome back. As we continue our descent, leaving the more visible surface behaviors behind, we arrive at level 22. Here, in the cool, quiet depths, we encounter one of the most fundamental and disorienting mechanisms in the narcissistic psyche: projection. Allow the sound of my voice to be a gentle guide as we explore this complex phenomenon, letting this knowledge settle peacefully into your mind as you drift deeper towards rest. Projection, in its most basic sense, is a psychological defense mechanism. Its roots lie deep in psychoanalytic theory, first articulated by Sigmund Freud. He observed that the human ego, in its effort to protect itself from anxiety, often resorts to unconscious strategies. Projection is one of the most primitive, yet most powerful of these strategies. It is the process of unconsciously taking unwanted emotions or traits you don't like about yourself and attributing them to someone else. It is a psychological sleight of hand, where the mind offloads its own internal burdens onto an external target. For most people, this might manifest in subtle ways. A person struggling with their own dishonesty might become intensely suspicious of others, convinced that everyone is trying to deceive them. Or someone feeling insecure about their own intelligence might be quick to label others as ignorant. It is a way of disowning a part of oneself that feels shameful or threatening. However, in the context of narcissism, projection is not a rare or subtle occurrence. It is a primary mode of operation. It is the engine that drives much of their interpersonal dynamics. The narcissist's entire sense of self is built upon a grandiose yet incredibly fragile facade of perfection. Any feeling, thought, or behavior that contradicts this flawless image, such as shame, inadequacy, envy, or guilt, is utterly intolerable to their ego. It represents a psychic threat that must be neutralized immediately. And so, the mechanism of projection activates. The narcissist does not simply deny the negative trait, they actively export it. The internal whisper of, "I am a failure," becomes the external roar of, "You are a failure." The creeping realization, "I am being manipulative," is transformed into the pointed accusation, "You are trying to manipulate me." The narcissist who is unfaithful will often become obsessively jealous, accusing their loyal partner of infidelity. They are, in a very real sense, viewing the world through a distorted lens, seeing their own disowned flaws reflected back at them in the faces of those closest to them. This process serves two critical functions for the narcissist. First, it provides immediate relief from their own internal conflict and shame.
By placing the badness outside of themselves, they can preserve their inner sanctum of perfection. Second, it gives them a justifiable reason to attack or devalue the other person. They are not merely being cruel. In their mind, they are righteously responding to the flaws they so clearly see in you. They attack in you what they cannot bear within themselves. To be on the receiving end of narcissistic projection is a profoundly disorienting and painful experience. It is a form of psychological warfare that can make you question your own reality. You find yourself defending against accusations that have no basis in fact, but are delivered with such conviction that you begin to wonder if you are mistaken. The narcissist is not simply lying. They often genuinely believe their own projections. They have externalized their inner demons so completely that they perceive them as your own. You become the container for all of their unwanted parts, a repository for their shame, their rage, and their inadequacies. Understanding projection is crucial to understanding the narcissistic iceberg. It is the invisible current that directs their accusations and criticisms. It explains why their attacks often feel so bizarrely personal, yet so utterly inaccurate. They are not describing you. They are, with haunting clarity, describing themselves. As we leave level 22, allow this understanding to bring a sense of peace. You are not the person they claimed you were. You are simply a mirror reflecting a truth they could not bear to see. Now, just let that thought drift as we continue our journey down into the still, silent waters below.
Blame shifting. As we continue our gentle descent, allowing the surface world to grow quiet and distant, we arrive at level 23 of our exploration. Here, suspended in the cool, deep currents of the narcissistic psyche, we encounter a foundational pillar of its architecture, the mechanism of blame shifting. This is not merely the act of making an excuse, as one might do to avoid simple trouble. Blame shifting, in this context, is a profound and almost reflexive psychological defense. It is the art of externalizing all responsibility, of taking any negative outcome, any personal flaw, any mistake, and transposing it onto someone or something else. It is a psychodynamic process so deeply ingrained that, for the individual employing it, the shifted blame feels like an objective truth. To understand its mechanism, we must first revisit the core of the narcissistic structure, an extraordinarily fragile ego protected by an elaborate fortress of grandiosity. This grandiose self-image, the false self, is one of perfection, of infallibility. Any event that suggests imperfection, that hints at a mistake or a personal failing, is not just an inconvenience, it is an existential threat. It is a crack in the fortress wall through which an unbearable, deeply buried shame might flood in. And so blame shifting acts as an emergency psychological maneuver. Imagine holding a burning coal of shame in your hand. The pain is immediate and intolerable. The reflexive action is not to examine the coal, but to hurl it away as quickly as possible. For the narcissist, accountability is this burning coal. The moment it appears, it must be thrown onto the nearest available person. The relief they feel is palpable as the threat to their self-concept is neutralized. This process is not always conscious or malicious in its intent, though its effects can be deeply damaging. It is more akin to a psychological immune response. When a project at work fails, the narrative in their mind is not, "I mismanaged this." Instead, it instantly becomes, "My team was incompetent," or "I was given insufficient resources." The internal script writing is instantaneous and utterly convincing to the author. In interpersonal relationships, this manifests in pervasive and confusing ways. If they arrive late, it is because you did not remind them of the time correctly. If they have an outburst of anger, it is because you provoked them, because your behavior made them act that way. The locus of control for their own emotions and actions is perpetually placed outside of themselves. They are not the actor, but the reactor, forced into negative behavior by the flaws and failures of the world around them. The language of the blame shift is telling.
It is often couched in phrases like, "The only reason I did that was because you," or "If you hadn't, then I wouldn't have had to." This linguistic construction neatly transfers the entire burden of cause and effect. It creates a reality in which they are perpetually the victim of circumstance, a blameless figure navigating a world of others' mistakes. For the person on the receiving end, this is a profoundly disorienting experience. It is a form of psychological erosion where your own sense of reality is constantly challenged. You find yourself apologizing for things that were not your fault, defending yourself against accusations that make no logical sense, and eventually you may even begin to internalize the blame, wondering if you are, in fact, the source of all the discord. As we observe this mechanism here at level 23, we see it not as a simple character flaw, but as a critical survival strategy for a psyche that cannot tolerate the weight of its own imperfection. It is the perpetual exportation of shame, a necessary process to keep the grandiose self-image intact. And as we drift deeper, we will see how this fundamental defense supports even more complex behaviors below. For now, simply observe this process, this redirection of energy, and allow the understanding to settle gently in your mind as you continue to relax, to let go,
and to drift. Level 24. Covert put-downs, negging. As we continue our descent, we arrive at level 24. Here, in the cool, dimly lit waters beneath the surface of overt aggression, we encounter a more subtle and insidious form of manipulation, the covert put-down, more commonly known by its modern term, negging. Allow your mind to relax as we explore this concept. There is nothing to do, nothing to solve. Simply observe this information as it drifts by, like sediment settling in the deep. A covert put-down is not a direct insult. A direct insult is obvious, a clear act of hostility that is easy to identify and reject. Instead, negging operates in the murky gray area between a compliment and a criticism. It is a statement designed to subtly undermine a person's confidence disguised within the structure of a seemingly innocuous observation. Consider the phrase, "That's a beautiful dress. It's amazing how it makes your figure look so much slimmer." Or perhaps, "You're surprisingly articulate for someone in your line of work." Listen to the structure. Each statement begins with the veneer of a compliment, which encourages the recipient to lower their defenses. But it is immediately followed by a qualification, a subtle barb that introduces an element of doubt. The dress is beautiful because it corrects a perceived flaw. The person is articulate in spite of their profession. This calculated ambiguity is not accidental. It is the very engine of the technique. The term negging itself was popularized in the early 2000s within the seduction and pickup artists communities. Its original cynical purpose was to moderately lower a target's self-esteem, making them more receptive to the speaker's advances, by creating a desire for their approval. While its origin is specific, the underlying psychological mechanism is a timeless tool of narcissistic control. Here is how it functions within the narcissistic dynamic. The primary goal is to destabilize your sense of self. When you receive a neg, your mind experiences a moment of cognitive dissonance. You are trying to process two conflicting pieces of information at once, the positive and the negative. Was that a compliment? Was it an insult? This confusion prevents you from forming a clear emotional response. You can't simply accept the praise, nor can you fully reject the criticism. You are left in a state of subtle unease. This unease serves the narcissist perfectly. By constantly planting these small seeds of doubt, they gently erode your self-worth over time. It is a psychological death by 1,000 cuts. Because each individual statement is so subtle, it comes with built-in plausible deniability. If you were to challenge the narcissist, they would likely respond with feigned innocence. "What are you talking about? I was giving you a compliment. You're being far too sensitive." This maneuver not only deflects blame, but also makes you question your own perception of reality, a classic precursor to gaslighting. The application of negging is a quiet assertion of superiority. It implicitly positions the narcissist as a discerning judge, someone with high standards, whose approval is difficult to obtain. By offering you a qualified, backhanded compliment, they are communicating that you are close to meeting their standards, but not quite there. This creates a dynamic where you may find yourself subconsciously striving for their unqualified validation, a validation they will likely never give, because to do so would be to relinquish their position of power. Let this understanding settle. Recognize this pattern not with alarm, but with the calm clarity of an observer. It is a small, calculated move in a much larger game of control. It is the gentle, persistent current that seeks to pull you away from the shore of your own confidence. But now you can feel that current. You can name it, and in naming it, you understand its direction and its purpose. There is no need to fight it now. Simply let the knowledge be and allow your awareness to drift deeper and deeper into a state of peaceful, comfortable rest.
Love bombing. As we continue our descent,
we arrive at level 25 of the narcissism iceberg. Here, we encounter one of the most powerful, disorienting, and foundational tactics in the manipulator's toolkit: love bombing. Take a slow, deep breath and allow your mind to settle as we explore this phenomenon. Love bombing is not simply intense affection. It is a meticulously crafted performance, a psychological siege designed to overwhelm and secure a target. At its core, love bombing is the overwhelming and rapid display of attention, admiration, and affection with the intent to create a sense of dependency and obligation. It is the first stage of the idealization, devaluation, discard cycle. Imagine a whirlwind romance, but amplified to an almost cinematic degree. It is a tidal wave of communication, constant texts, calls, and messages. It is a flood of flattery, where you are told you are perfect, a soulmate, the one they have been searching for their entire life. It involves extravagant gifts, grand gestures, and a relentless focus on you, mirroring your interests, your dreams, and your insecurities to create an illusion of a perfect, almost fated connection. A healthy relationship builds its foundation brick by brick, with trust and intimacy growing over time. Love bombing, in contrast, attempts to construct an entire skyscraper overnight on a foundation of sand. The term itself, love bombing, did not originate in the field of psychology. It was first coined in the 1970s to describe the recruitment techniques used by leaders of cults, most notably the Unification Church. New or potential members would be showered with affection, praise, and attention by a group of established members. This process was designed to isolate the individual from their previous life, lower their critical thinking, and foster a deep sense of belonging and loyalty to the group. The mechanism is identical when applied on an interpersonal level by a narcissist. The goal is the same: to recruit you, to make you a follower, and to secure your devotion as a source of supply. The psychological mechanism behind its effectiveness is profound. This intense idealization preys on a fundamental human need to be seen, to be valued, and to be loved. When someone places you on a pedestal, it triggers a powerful neurochemical response. Your brain is flooded with dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward, and oxytocin, often called the love hormone, which facilitates bonding. You experience a genuine euphoric high, an addictive state of bliss. The narcissist becomes the sole supplier of this incredible feeling. This creates a powerful cognitive bias.
Any small red flags, any moments of doubt are easily dismissed because the positive reinforcement is so overwhelming. You are conditioned to associate the narcissist with feelings of unparalleled joy and validation. The application of love bombing is strategic and serves a crucial purpose. It is the architectural blueprint for the subsequent abuse. By creating this intense, idealized baseline, the narcissist establishes a powerful anchor. Once they have secured your emotional investment, they can begin the devaluation phase. They will slowly withdraw the affection, replacing it with criticism, silence, and emotional distance. Because you have experienced the euphoric high of the love bombing stage, you will desperately try to regain it. You will blame yourself for the shift in their behavior, wondering what you did wrong to lose that perfect love. The memory of the love bombing phase becomes the chain that binds you. It creates a powerful cognitive dissonance where you struggle to reconcile the wonderful person from the beginning with the cruel person before you now. You cling to the hope that the real them, the love bombing them, will return if you just try harder. So, here at level 25, we see love bombing not as an act of love, but as an act of acquisition. It is the sweet, intoxicating poison offered before the trap is sprung. It is the siren's call luring you towards the rocks with a beautiful song. Understanding it for what it is, a calculated strategy of manipulation, is the first step in disarming its power. Let this understanding settle into your mind as we prepare to drift even deeper.
Level 26, Triangulation. As we continue our descent, settling deeper into the quiet stillness of this exploration, we arrive at level 26.
The water around us grows denser, the light more diffused, and the concepts more intricate. Here we encounter a foundational dynamic in the narcissistic paradigm, a tactic as old as human conflict itself: triangulation. At its core, triangulation is the act of bringing a third person or entity into a two-person relationship. In a healthy context, this can be a positive action: a couple seeking a therapist, or a person asking a trusted friend for perspective. However, in the realm of narcissism, this mechanism is weaponized. It is not used for resolution, but for control. Not for clarity, but for confusion. The narcissist transforms a simple line of communication between two people into a complex, unstable, and easily manipulated triangle. Conceptually, the term finds its roots in family systems theory, particularly the work of psychiatrist Murray Bowen. Bowen observed that a two-person system, or a dyad, is inherently unstable under stress. When anxiety increases, the dyad will naturally seek to pull in a third person to diffuse the tension, creating a triangle. For the narcissist, this is not a subconscious coping mechanism, it is a conscious and preferred strategy. They are masters at creating and managing these triangles to serve their own needs, ensuring they are always at the most powerful vertex, the one from which all information and validation flows. The mechanism of triangulation is insidious because of its variety. In one common form, the narcissist introduces a source of competition. This could be an ex-partner who is consistently held up as a paragon of virtue, a coworker who is praised incessantly, or even a family member. They might say things like, "My last partner always understood this about me," or "It's a shame you can't be more like my friend who is so successful." The goal is to create insecurity and a sense of inadequacy in their target. The target is no longer in a relationship with just the narcissist. They are now in a silent, desperate competition with a third party, real or imagined, vying for the narcissist's approval. Another application is the creation of a common enemy. The narcissist will align with you against a third person, creating a false sense of intimacy and loyalty. They will share secrets, gossip, and create an us against the world narrative. This feels like bonding, like a special connection. However, the foundation is built on negativity and is inherently fragile. The moment you are no longer useful in this dynamic, or you begin to question the narrative, you will find yourself swiftly recast from the role of confidant to the role of the enemy.
The triangle simply rotates. Perhaps the most classic form is using the third person as a messenger, often referred to as a flying monkey. The narcissist will communicate through others, distorting messages and avoiding direct accountability. They will tell one person one story and another person a slightly different version. This keeps everyone off balance and reliant on the narcissist as the central hub of information. It isolates the target, making them feel paranoid and unsure of who to trust. When confronted, the narcissist can simply claim innocence, saying, "I never said that. You must have misunderstood them," thereby maintaining plausible deniability while sowing chaos. The effect on the recipient of triangulation is profoundly destabilizing. It erodes self-esteem, creates constant anxiety, and fosters a deep sense of confusion. You begin to doubt your own perceptions, your own worth, and your own sanity. The world becomes a stage where you are unsure of your role, and the script is constantly being rewritten by an unseen director. As we let this understanding settle, allow your mind to recognize this pattern not as a reflection of your own inadequacy, but as a calculated external strategy. Seeing the triangle for what it is, a tool of manipulation, is the first step in dismantling its power. Let the quiet clarity of this knowledge bring a sense of peace as we drift further down into the even deeper waters that await.
They might answer a question about their finances by questioning the very concept of ownership in a late-stage capitalist society. The goal is to create a dense fog of words so impenetrable that you lose track of your original point. The cognitive load becomes immense. You are not only trying to hold on to your own argument, but you are also trying to navigate the labyrinthine, meaningless structure they are building around you. It is profoundly disorienting. You feel like you are arguing with a phantom. You can't pin them down. Every time you get close to a solid point, they dissolve into a mist of empty verbiage. The ultimate purpose of word salad is to make you give up. It is a war of attrition fought with words as weapons. The narcissist can maintain this circular, nonsensical monologue for an astonishingly long time, fueled by the need to avoid shame and maintain their position of superiority. Eventually, you become so tired, so confused, and so frustrated that you concede. You might say, "Fine, forget it," or "Okay, you're right," not because you are convinced, but because the mental and emotional cost of continuing the conversation is simply too high. And in that moment, the narcissist has won. They have successfully defended their ego, avoided all responsibility, and confirmed in their own mind that they are intellectually superior because you were unable to keep up with their complex thoughts. Word salad is not a failure of communication. It is a calculated, exhausting, and brutally effective strategy of psychological warfare.
Moving goalposts. As we descend now to level 28 of our exploration, we encounter a tactic both maddeningly simple and profoundly destabilizing. It is known as moving the goalposts. The phrase itself is borrowed from the world of sport, and this origin provides us with a perfect, tangible metaphor for an otherwise elusive psychological manipulation. Imagine a player poised to score a decisive goal. They have trained, they have strategized, they have positioned themselves perfectly. As they strike the ball, it soars through the air, destined for victory. But just before it crosses the line, the goalposts themselves are physically lifted and moved, rendering the perfect shot, the immense effort, entirely meaningless. The player is left standing, confused and defeated, not by a superior opponent, but by the very rules of the game, which have been arbitrarily changed at the last possible moment. In the context of narcissistic manipulation, the goalposts are not made of wood or metal, but of expectations, promises, and standards. Moving them is a subtle, insidious form of control designed to create a perpetual state of striving in the target, a game that can never, ever be won. The mechanism is rooted in establishing a conditional framework for approval, love, or reward. The narcissist sets a specific target. If you just achieve X, then I will give you Y. For example, if you get that promotion at work, then we can finally be happy and I'll feel secure. Or, if you just lose a little weight, I will be more affectionate. Or even, if you can just prove you trust me by doing this one thing, I will finally trust you in return. The target, seeking validation and the promised outcome, invests immense energy, time, and emotional labor into meeting this condition. They work late, they change their habits, they compromise their own boundaries, all with their eyes fixed on that singular goal. And then, the moment they achieve it, the moment they stand ready to claim their reward, the goalposts are moved. The promotion is achieved, but the new standard becomes, well, a promotion is nice, but your colleague is already a senior manager. The real issue is that you don't make enough money. The weight is lost, but the new condition is, you look better, but you're still not as intellectually stimulating as my ex-partner. The trust is demonstrated, but the goal shifts to, that was one time. You'll have to keep proving it to me because your past behavior makes it very difficult. The psychological impact on the target is devastating. Firstly, it creates a profound sense of inadequacy. The target internalizes the failure, believing that they are the one who is not good enough. They rarely question the legitimacy of the ever-changing rules. Instead, they question their own worth, their own abilities, their own perception of reality. This erodes self-esteem and fosters a deep-seated belief that they are fundamentally flawed and must try even harder next time. Secondly, it establishes an unbreakable dynamic of control.
The narcissist becomes the sole arbiter of success and failure, the gatekeeper of happiness and approval. By constantly changing the criteria, they ensure the target remains in a state of perpetual pursuit, forever seeking a reward that will never be granted. This keeps the target engaged, dependent, and focused entirely on the narcissist's whims. It is a form of psychological conditioning, training the target to believe that their value is contingent on an endless, exhausting performance. The only way to win this impossible game is to recognize that the field is rigged and to calmly, quietly walk away. Victim mentality. As we continue our gentle descent, leaving the surface world further and further behind, we arrive at level 29. Here in the cool, quiet depths, we encounter a foundational pillar of the narcissistic structure, one that is both profoundly counterintuitive and powerfully effective: victim mentality. At first glance, this seems a contradiction. How can an individual defined by grandiosity, by an inflated sense of self-importance and entitlement, so consistently cast themselves in the role of the wronged, the misunderstood, the perpetual victim? The answer lies not in weakness, but in strategy. Narcissistic victimhood is not a genuine expression of pain. It is a sophisticated and highly adaptive shield, a manipulative tool used to control narratives, evade accountability, and extract a specific, potent form of narcissistic supply. To understand this mechanism, we must first differentiate it from authentic victimhood. A person who has genuinely been wronged experiences real pain, trauma, and a sense of injustice. Their focus is often on healing, understanding, and seeking resolution. For the narcissist, the victim role is a performance. It is a posture, a strategic identity adopted whenever their fragile ego is threatened. The core function is blame externalization. The deep, terrifying shame that sits at the heart of the narcissistic personality cannot be consciously acknowledged. Therefore, any failure, any criticism, any negative outcome must be the fault of someone or something else. By positioning themselves as the victim, they preemptively absolve themselves of all responsibility. The world is unfair, people are jealous, you are too demanding, the circumstances were impossible. In this narrative, they are never the agent of their own misfortune. They are merely the noble sufferer. This brings us to a crucial psychological model known as the Karpman drama triangle. It posits three roles in any dysfunctional interaction: the persecutor, the rescuer, and the victim. The narcissist is a master of this triangle, but their home base, their starting point, is almost always the victim. By claiming victimhood, "You wouldn't believe the day I've had," or "No one ever appreciates what I do," they issue an invitation. They are baiting you to enter the drama. If you offer help and sympathy, you become the rescuer, which feeds them with attention and care, a form of supply. If you challenge their narrative or try to hold them accountable, you are immediately cast as the persecutor. "I can't believe you're attacking me right now after everything I've been through." In one swift move, they have denied, attacked, and reversed the roles of victim and offender. You, who may have had a legitimate grievance, are now the aggressor, and they are the wounded party. This application is constant and pervasive. In a relationship, they will provoke an argument, and when you finally react with frustration, they will seize upon your reaction as proof of your cruelty. They become the victim of your anger, completely erasing their own provocative behavior from the record. In the workplace, a missed deadline is never due to their poor planning. It is because their team undermined them or their boss failed to support them. They weave a tale of being the lone competent soul in a sea of incompetence, martyred by the failings of others. This constant performance of victimhood is exhausting and disorienting for those around them. It creates a fog of guilt and self-doubt. You begin to question your own perceptions. Perhaps you were too harsh. Perhaps you are asking for too much. This is the goal. A confused and guilt-ridden person is far easier to control. The narcissist's victimhood is not a cry for help. It is a demand for submission. It is a powerful, passive-aggressive weapon that maintains their central position in the universe, ensuring that all emotional energy, all care, and all attention flows inexorably back toward them. Let this understanding settle as we drift deeper still into the quiet and the dark.
Boundary testing. As we continue our descent, we arrive at level 30 of the Narcissism Iceberg. Here, submerged just below the more obvious surface behaviors, we encounter a fundamental and insidious mechanism: boundary testing. Let this concept settle in your mind. Boundary testing is not a direct confrontation. It is not a declaration of war. Rather, it is a subtle, almost scientific process of reconnaissance. Imagine a cartographer gently tapping along a coastline to map its every inlet and weakness. This is the nature of boundary testing. It is a series of small, calculated probes designed to gauge the strength, flexibility, and ultimately the permeability of your personal limits. The concept itself is not new, though the term has gained prominence in contemporary psychology. Its roots can be traced to the study of family systems and attachment theory, which observed how individuals learn and negotiate interpersonal rules from their earliest moments. In a healthy dynamic, boundaries are respected and mutually understood. In a narcissistic dynamic, however, boundaries are not seen as a feature of a healthy individual, but as a challenge to be overcome, a wall to be dismantled. The mechanism of boundary testing operates on a principle of gradualism. It rarely begins with a grand, egregious violation. Instead, it starts with a minor transgression, an act so small it often feels petty or unreasonable to even address. Perhaps it is showing up to your home 10 minutes earlier than agreed upon, just to see if you will accommodate them. Perhaps it is a slightly too personal question, disguised as innocent curiosity. It could be borrowing a small item without asking, or offering an unsolicited opinion on your choices, framed as helpful advice. Each of these acts is a carefully launched probe. The act itself is secondary. The primary objective is to observe your reaction. Do you appear flustered but say nothing? Do you laugh it off nervously? Do you apologize for your own inconvenience? Or do you calmly and firmly restate your boundary? The narcissist is a keen student of these reactions. If you yield, a mental note is made. This boundary is soft. This limit is negotiable. A successful test, no matter how minor, provides a crucial piece of data and, more importantly, an invitation to escalate. The 10-minute early arrival becomes an unannounced visit. The personal question becomes an interrogation of your private life. The borrowed pen becomes a demand for your time, your energy, or your resources. This process is often compared to the apocryphal story of the frog in boiling water. A frog placed in boiling water will immediately jump out. But a frog placed in cool water that is slowly heated will not perceive the danger and will be cooked to death. Boundary testing is the slow, incremental turning up of the heat. Each minor violation that goes unchecked normalizes a slightly greater level of intrusion until you find yourself in a situation you never would have tolerated from the outset. The application of this technique serves multiple purposes for the narcissist. Primarily, it is an instrument of control. By systematically identifying and eroding your boundaries, they reshape the relationship dynamic to center entirely around their own needs and desires. Your personal space, your time, and your emotional autonomy become territories to be colonized. Secondly, it is a method for gauging supply. A strong emotional reaction to a boundary test, whether it be anger, frustration, or confusion, is a potent form of narcissistic supply. It confirms to them that they have an impact, that they can affect your emotional state, which reaffirms their sense of power and importance. Even a successful defense of your boundary provides them with valuable information about how to approach you next time, perhaps with a different tactic. And so, here at level 30, we can observe this quiet, strategic campaign. It is not the overt aggression of the higher levels, but a more patient, more insidious form of psychological warfare. It is the slow, steady drip of water that eventually wears away the stone. Understanding this mechanism is crucial, for it is in the defense of these small, seemingly insignificant boundaries that the entire structure of narcissistic control can be prevented from ever taking hold. Let your mind drift on this thought, the quiet strength found in a simple, gentle no. Selective memory. As we drift deeper into the quiet, submerged world of the narcissism iceberg, we arrive at level 31.
Here, suspended in the silent currents of the psyche, we encounter a mechanism both fascinating and profoundly disorienting: selective memory. This is not the ordinary fallibility of human recollection, the gentle fading of details over time that we all experience. The selective memory of the narcissist is not a passive process of forgetting, but an active, albeit often unconscious, process of curation. It is the careful, meticulous editing of the past to protect the fragile architecture of the present self. To understand this phenomenon, we must first release the common notion of memory as a perfect recording, a video file stored in the brain to be replayed with perfect fidelity. Psychologists, particularly since the pioneering work of Sir Frederick Bartlett in the 1930s, have understood memory as a reconstructive process. Each time we recall an event, we are not simply accessing a file. We are rebuilding the memory from fragments, and in that rebuilding, we are influenced by our current beliefs, our emotions, and our understanding of ourselves. Our personal narrative, our schema, shapes how we remember. For the narcissist, the central, non-negotiable schema is the preservation of their grandiose and idealized self-image. This self-concept is a fortress, and any memory that threatens its walls must be neutralized. A memory of failure, of shame, of being wrong, or of acting cruelly is not just an unpleasant thought, it is an existential threat. It creates a state of intense psychological discomfort known as cognitive dissonance, the clash between the belief, I am a superior, flawless person, and the memory, I did a flawed, shameful thing. To resolve this dissonance, the mind employs a powerful defense. The offending memory is altered, recontextualized, or deleted entirely. The narcissist may genuinely not remember the promise they broke, because acknowledging that promise would mean acknowledging a failure. They may have no recollection of the vicious words they spoke in a moment of rage, because to remember them would be to accept that they are not the calm, controlled, superior being they believe themselves to be. Their memory revises history in real time, casting them as the hero, the victim, or the misunderstood genius, but never, ever the villain. In practice, this manifests in bewildering ways for those in their orbit. You might recall a conversation with absolute clarity, only to have them deny it ever took place, and with such profound conviction that you begin to question your own sanity. This is a cornerstone of gaslighting.
They will remember their own contributions to a project with vivid, aggrandized detail, while the contributions of others become blurry, insignificant footnotes. They will recall your mistakes with crystalline precision, preserving them as evidence for future arguments, while their own transgressions dissolve into a fog of non-recollection. This is not always a conscious, deliberate act of deception, which is what makes it so powerful and so perplexing. It is a deeply ingrained, automated cognitive process. They are not simply lying about the past. In their internal world, the past has genuinely been rewritten. The memory has been refiled under a different heading or moved to a psychological archive so deep it is, for all practical purposes, inaccessible. It is a testament to the mind's profound ability to protect itself, sacrificing objective truth for the sake of subjective survival. Selective memory, therefore, is the loyal gatekeeper of the narcissistic narrative, ensuring that the story they tell themselves about themselves remains pristine, heroic, and untarnished by the inconvenient truths of reality.
Future faking. Welcome back. As we continue our descent into the quiet depths of the narcissism iceberg, we arrive at level 32. Here, in the cool, blue-lit waters, we encounter a particularly insidious and powerful form of psychological manipulation, a tool that leverages not the past nor even the present, but the shimmering, unwritten promise of tomorrow. We have arrived at the concept of future faking. At its core, future faking is the art of weaving a tapestry of a shared, idealized future with the sole purpose of controlling and securing a person's compliance and investment in the present. It is not merely lying, it is a form of psychological currency minted from the hopes and dreams of another. The narcissist becomes an architect of phantom castles, sketching out blueprints for a life that they have no intention of ever building. This behavior, while given a modern name, is as old as persuasion itself. It is the timeless tactic of the charlatan who promises a miracle cure, the con artist who sells shares in a fictitious enterprise, or the romantic rogue who pledges eternal devotion to secure temporary affection. In the context of personality disorders, however, it becomes a systematic and often unconscious strategy for maintaining a source of supply. The mechanism of future faking is profoundly effective because it hijacks our brain's most optimistic and powerful systems. It taps directly into the universal human longing for security, for partnership, for a life better than the one we have now. The process typically begins during the idealization phase of a relationship. The narcissist, an expert in mirroring, will listen intently to your deepest desires. Do you dream of living in the countryside? They will speak of a farmhouse with a wraparound porch. Do you long to travel? They will describe in vivid detail the sunsets you will watch together in Tuscany. Do you wish for a family? They will discuss children's names and the schools they might attend. These are not idle daydreams. They are carefully selected, bespoke promises, tailored to fit you perfectly. Hearing these plans creates a powerful neurochemical response, a rush of dopamine and oxytocin. It generates a potent bond, not to the person as they are, but to the potential of the life they are offering. You fall in love not just with an individual, but with a shared destiny. This promised future then becomes the ultimate tool of leverage. It is the collateral held against your present-day behavior. If you begin to pull away or question their actions, the future is invoked. Don't you want our house in the country, they might ask, subtly implying that your descent is the only obstacle. The beautiful future is always just around the corner, but its arrival is perpetually conditional on your submission, your patience, and your willingness to overlook current transgressions. The goalposts are forever shifting. We'll move in together as soon as I get this promotion. We'll get married after I sort out my finances. These are milestones that, for the narcissist, are never intended to be reached. You will see this applied not only in romantic contexts, but in professional and familial ones as well. It is the manager who dangles the prospect of a partnership to extract endless overtime from an employee. It is the parent who promises love and acceptance once a child achieves a certain, ever-receding standard of success. The defining characteristic of future faking is its vagueness and lack of concrete action. There are rarely tangible steps taken, no houses viewed, no rings purchased, no real financial plans made. It exists entirely in the realm of conversation, a beautiful but ephemeral mirage. The victim is left in a state of suspended animation, investing their time, emotions, and resources into a joint venture that only one person knows is destined for bankruptcy. Understanding future faking is to recognize that for some, promises are not commitments, they are tools. They are the tranquilizing melody played to keep you calm and compliant today, with no thought or care for the silence that will inevitably follow tomorrow. As you rest here, in the quiet of this level, let the weight of these phantom futures dissolve. They are not real. They hold no power. There is only the gentle, steady current of the present moment, carrying you deeper into a state of peaceful rest.
Hoovering. As we continue our descent, settling deeper into the quiet, cool layers of the iceberg, we arrive at level 33. Let this level be a place of calm observation, of understanding a mechanism rather than reliving an experience. Here, we encounter the phenomenon known as hoovering. The term itself is strikingly utilitarian, borrowed from the brand name of the vacuum cleaner. And this is no accident. The metaphor is precise. Hoovering, in the context of narcissistic dynamics, is the attempt by the narcissist to suck a person, a former source of supply, back into their orbit after a period of discard or separation. It is not an act of reconciliation, it is an act of retrieval. Like the machine for which it is named, the purpose is to draw something in to fill an emptiness. This maneuver almost always occurs when the narcissist is experiencing what one might call a supply crisis. Their new source may have proven disappointing, or perhaps they have grown bored, or an external blow to their ego has left them feeling diminished and insecure.
In this state of deficit, their mind scans its inventory of past resources. A former partner, friend, or family member is not remembered with fondness or regret, but as a proven, reliable appliance. An appliance that once provided adoration, validation, conflict, or attention. It is simply more efficient, in their view, to reactivate a known device than to find and prime a new one. The mechanism of the Hoover relies on a deep understanding of the target's emotional landscape. The narcissist is a student of your hopes, your weaknesses, and the specific emotional notes that resonate most deeply within you. The Hoover is therefore rarely a clumsy direct plea. It is a carefully calibrated piece of psychological theater. It can manifest in a multitude of ways. There is the accidental text or call, a message supposedly meant for someone else, designed to reinsert their presence into your awareness with plausible deniability. It might be a message on a significant date, a birthday, an anniversary, a time when you are emotionally vulnerable and more susceptible to nostalgia. Often, it takes the form of a sudden, manufactured crisis, a vague post about a health scare, a message about a financial disaster, all designed to trigger your empathy, your desire to rescue and to care. They are banking on the residue of the trauma bond, the ingrained impulse to soothe their distress. Perhaps the most potent form of hoovering is the grand apology, the sudden proclamation of an epiphany. They will say everything you ever wanted to hear. I've been in therapy, they might claim. I realize now that you were the only one who ever truly understood me. I was a fool to let you go.
This performance is so compelling because it validates the target's entire past experience. It creates a powerful cognitive dissonance, forcing the question, what if they really have changed? What if this time is different? But we must look at the function, not the form. The function of the Hoover is not to repair a relationship, but to replenish a resource. It is an instrumental act. The narcissist's lack of object constancy means they do not hold a stable, integrated image of you in their mind. You are either all good and serving their needs, or all bad and discarded. The Hoover is simply an attempt to switch you back to the all good setting. It has nothing to do with your intrinsic worth or their genuine remorse, and everything to do with their immediate pressing need. Resisting a Hoover is one of the most difficult and most powerful steps in breaking the cycle. It is the act of recognizing the vacuum for what it is, an empty machine seeking to be filled, and choosing, finally, not to be its fuel. Let this understanding settle as we drift further down into the quiet depths.
Flying monkeys. As we continue our descent into the complex architecture of the narcissistic psyche, we arrive at level 34. Here, we move beyond the internal world of the narcissist and begin to examine the external systems they construct to maintain their reality. We encounter a term borrowed from classic literature, a metaphor so apt it has become indispensable in the lexicon of psychology: the flying monkeys. The term, of course, originates from L. Frank Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, where the Wicked Witch of the West dispatches her legion of winged primates to carry out her malevolent orders. They are not the source of the evil, but its willing or unwitting instruments. In the context of narcissistic abuse, a flying monkey is a person whom the narcissist enlists, consciously or unconsciously, to act on their behalf. These individuals become agents, extending the narcissist's reach and influence, often to harass, invalidate, or further isolate the narcissist's chosen target. The mechanism by which these agents are recruited is a masterclass in psychological manipulation. It rarely involves a direct command. Instead, the narcissist skillfully crafts a narrative of victimhood. They will approach a mutual friend, a family member, a coworker, or even a therapist, and present a carefully edited version of events. In this story, the narcissist is the one who has been wronged, misunderstood, and deeply hurt. They portray their actual victim as unstable, aggressive, or malicious. This is the foundation of the smear campaign. The narcissist plays on the empathy, loyalty, and often the naivety of the third party, grooming them to see the world through the narcissist's distorted lens. Once this narrative is accepted, the third party is effectively deputized. They may begin to act out of a genuine, albeit misguided, sense of concern or justice. They might approach the narcissist's target with unsolicited advice, saying things like, "I'm just worried about you," or "I think you're being unfair to them." They may relay information back to the narcissist, acting as a spy. In more severe cases, they might participate in ostracizing the target, delivering threats, or spreading gossip throughout a social circle or workplace. The flying monkey serves several critical functions for the narcissist. Firstly, they provide validation. By believing the narcissist's story, they reinforce the narcissist's delusion that they are the victim, not the aggressor. Secondly, they allow the narcissist to engage in abuse by proxy. The narcissist can maintain an image of innocence and plausible deniability. After all, they are not the ones sending the harassing messages or spreading the rumors. Their hands appear clean. Thirdly, and perhaps most painfully for the target, this dynamic creates profound isolation. When one's own friends, family, or colleagues turn against them, armed with the narcissist's disinformation, it creates an immense sense of betrayal and confusion. It makes the target question their own reality, a primary goal of gaslighting. It is important to understand that not all flying monkeys are malicious. Many are themselves victims of the narcissist's manipulation, genuinely believing they are helping a friend in need. They are unable to see the carefully constructed facade or the hidden agenda. Others, however, may be more complicit, perhaps enjoying the drama or benefiting from their alliance with the narcissist. Regardless of their intent, their function remains the same: to serve as the arms and legs of the narcissist's will, enabling the abuse to continue and ensuring the true victim is left without a support system. This outsourcing of aggression is a hallmark of a more calculated and systemic level of narcissistic control, a chilling testament to their ability to orchestrate the world around them to suit their own internal narrative. Smear campaigns. Welcome back. As we continue our descent, allow the gentle current of understanding to guide you deeper into the intricate structures of the narcissistic mind. We leave behind the more overt, yet still personal manipulations, and now arrive at a level where the conflict is externalized, weaponized, and made public. Settle in, breathe slowly, and let us now explore level 35, smear campaigns. A smear campaign is not mere gossip. It is not a fleeting moment of anger or a simple venting of frustration. It is a deliberate, systematic, and often prolonged strategy of character assassination. It is the narcissist's psychological warfare, waged not with armies, but with whispers, innuendos, and carefully crafted falsehoods, all designed to destroy your reputation, credibility, and social support system. The mechanism of the smear campaign is rooted in the narcissist's profound inability to accept responsibility or face the collapse of their carefully constructed false self. When a relationship ends, or when they feel their control slipping, they cannot process the event as a mutual failing or a simple parting of ways. Instead, their entire reality is threatened. To protect their fragile ego from the shattering truth of their own flaws, they must construct an alternate narrative, a narrative in which they are the benevolent victim and you are the unstable, malicious, and pathological aggressor. This campaign often begins preemptively, long before you are even aware of it. The narcissist starts planting seeds of doubt among your mutual friends, family, or colleagues. They will present a distorted version of events, subtly framing you as unreasonable or emotionally volatile. They do this by mixing kernels of truth with outright lies, a technique that makes their stories tragically believable. They might take a private vulnerability you once shared with them in confidence and twist it into a public spectacle, portraying your sensitivity as instability. The primary agents in this campaign are what are often referred to as flying monkeys. These are the enablers and allies the narcissist recruits to their cause. By playing the victim with astonishing conviction, the narcissist garners sympathy and convinces these individuals that they are acting in the service of a just cause. These people then, often unwittingly, spread the narcissist's propaganda, further isolating the true target. They become extensions of the narcissist's will, carrying messages, reporting back information, and socially punishing the target on the narcissist's behalf. The core tactic at play is projection. The narcissist accuses you of the very behaviors they themselves are guilty of. If they were deceptive, they will call you a liar.
If they were manipulative, they will paint you as the master manipulator. If they were unfaithful, they will sow rumors of your infidelity. This serves a dual purpose. It deflects any scrutiny from their own actions, and it creates a smokescreen of confusion, making it difficult for outsiders to discern the truth. This is a form of psychological conditioning for the social circle, teaching them how to view you through the narcissist's distorted lens. The ultimate goal of the smear campaign is total isolation. By systematically poisoning the well of your social and familial support, the narcissist seeks to leave you with no one to turn to, no one who will believe you. In this state of isolation, you are more likely to doubt your own sanity, a phenomenon known as gaslighting, and you are less of a threat to the narcissist's carefully curated public image. They have not only exited your life, they have attempted to scorch the earth of your social landscape, ensuring their narrative is the only one that survives. To endure a smear campaign is to experience a profound and lonely injustice. It is to have your character publicly dismantled by the very person who once claimed to know you best. It is a testament not to a flaw within you, but to the desperate, defensive, and destructive emptiness at the core of the narcissistic personality. Let this understanding settle as we prepare to sink deeper, leaving the noise of the public campaign behind and moving into the quieter but no less significant levels that lie below.
Double standards. As we continue our descent, we arrive now at level 36, a principle so fundamental to the narcissistic operating system that it functions as a kind of constitutional law, the double standard. This is not mere hypocrisy, which can be a fleeting human failing. For the narcissist, the double standard is a codified, structural element of their reality. It is the invisible fence that separates their world from yours, a world in which two different sets of physical and moral laws apply. Let us begin by defining it in this specific context. A double standard is the asymmetrical application of principles, rules, and judgments. With a narcissist, this asymmetry is not an occasional oversight, it is the default setting. The simplest articulation is the classic phrase, "rules for thee, but not for me." However, its mechanism is far more profound. It stems from an ontological belief in their own exceptionalism. They do not see themselves as simply breaking the rules, they genuinely perceive themselves as existing above them. The rules that govern ordinary people, rules of fairness, reciprocity, consistency, and accountability, are, in their mind, designed for a different class of being. The origin of this mechanism lies deep within the formation of the narcissistic personality. It is born from the same core wound that creates the false self. To protect a fragile buried ego, the narcissist constructs a grandiose persona of perfection and superiority. To maintain this construct, reality must be continuously bent to fit its contours. A double standard is one of the most powerful tools for this reality bending. If they are special, then their needs, desires, and actions must also be special, exempt from the mundane logic that binds everyone else. Consider how this mechanism operates. It is powered by a profound lack of empathy. The narcissist is unable to emotionally or cognitively place themselves in your position to feel the sting of the injustice. When you are criticized for being 5 minutes late, while they may disappear for hours without a word, they do not register the imbalance. In their mind, their time is inherently more valuable. Their reasons are always valid emergencies, while yours are trivial failures of character. They do not experience cognitive dissonance, because to them, there is no contradiction. The two situations are, by definition, different because one involves them. Let us observe its application in the real world. In financial matters, the narcissist may spend extravagantly on their own whims, justifying each purchase as necessary, as a reward, or as an investment in their well-being. Yet your own, more modest spending may be scrutinized, criticized, and framed as irresponsible or frivolous.
In the realm of emotions, the double standard is a fortress. They are permitted volcanic eruptions of rage, prolonged periods of sullen silence, or dramatic displays of victimhood. This is framed as a justifiable reaction to the immense pressures they are under. Pressures often caused, they will insist, by you.
You, on the other hand, are expected to maintain the placid composure of a still lake. Your anger is hysteria, your sadness is manipulative, and your frustration is drama. You are not granted the same right to a full spectrum of human emotion. In communication, they may interrupt you, dismiss your opinions, or stare at their phone while you are speaking. This is their prerogative as the more important person in the conversation. However, they will demand your absolute, undivided attention when they choose to speak, becoming incensed at the slightest sign of distraction. The most corrosive application is in accountability. The narcissist's mistakes are never their fault. They are the fault of external circumstances, of bad luck, or, most conveniently, of you. You, however, will be held to an impossible standard of perfection. Your smallest error will be magnified, cataloged, and used as evidence of your fundamental inadequacy. The double standard, therefore, is not just about getting away with things. It is an instrument of control and a constant reinforcement of their self-perceived superiority. By subjecting you to a set of rules from which they are exempt, they are perpetually re-establishing the hierarchy. They are the sovereign and you are the subject. To understand this is to understand that you are not playing the same game. You are playing by a rulebook they wrote, can change at will, and will never, ever apply to themselves. As you rest, let go of the need to make it fair. You cannot correct a set of scales that was designed to be tilted. Simply observe it, understand its function, and allow that understanding to bring a quiet, detached peace.
Lack of accountability. As we continue our descent, leaving the more visible, surface-level traits behind, we arrive at level 37. Here, we encounter a foundational pillar of the narcissistic structure, the profound and pervasive lack of accountability. This is not merely an occasional reluctance to admit fault, it is a core operating principle, a defensive fortress built around a deeply fragile sense of self. To understand this is to understand one of the most maddening and destructive aspects of the narcissistic pathology. Let us begin with the concept itself. Accountability requires an individual to acknowledge a causal link between their actions or inactions and the resulting consequences, both for themselves and for others. It involves introspection, the capacity for remorse, and the willingness to make amends. For the narcissist, this entire sequence is short-circuited. Their psychological architecture is designed to externalize blame at all costs. Admitting fault is not just uncomfortable, it is perceived as a catastrophic threat, an existential wound. To accept responsibility for a negative outcome would be to admit imperfection, and to the narcissist's ego, imperfection is tantamount to annihilation. The mechanism behind this operates through several sophisticated, often unconscious psychological maneuvers. The most common is blame shifting. An event occurs, a mistake is made, feelings are hurt. The narcissist's mind immediately scans the environment not for a solution, but for a scapegoat. It is never, "What did I do wrong?" but always, "Who can I blame for this?" The fault is projected outward onto a partner, a colleague, a child, or even abstract concepts like the system or bad luck. You might hear phrases like, "Well, I wouldn't have gotten so angry if you hadn't been so sensitive," or "The project failed because the team didn't understand my vision." The responsibility is transferred and their pristine self-image remains intact. Another key mechanism is denial, and its more insidious cousin, gaslighting. In simple denial, the narcissist will flatly reject reality, insisting an event never happened or that words were never spoken. But with gaslighting, they go a step further. They actively seek to alter your perception of reality to absolve themselves. They will methodically dismantle your confidence in your own memory and sanity, causing you to question what you saw and heard. You're remembering it wrong, that's not how it happened, or the classic, "You're being dramatic." This serves the dual purpose of evading accountability while simultaneously cementing their power and control over your reality.
Historically, in the development of a healthy personality, a child learns accountability through a process of trial, error, and empathetic guidance. They learn that actions have consequences and that repairing harm is a vital part of social cohesion. The individual who develops narcissistic traits often misses this crucial developmental stage.
They may have been raised in an environment where they were never held accountable, creating a sense of entitlement. Or, conversely, they may have been subjected to such severe, shaming criticism for any minor mistake that they learned to develop impenetrable defenses against ever admitting fault again. For them, accountability is inextricably linked to unbearable shame and punishment. In its application, this lack of accountability poisons every domain of life. In a relationship, it creates a landscape where genuine intimacy and trust cannot grow. Every conflict becomes a courtroom drama where the narcissist is the prosecutor, judge, and jury, and you are invariably the defendant. There can be no mutual problem solving because in their mind, there is no mutual problem. There is only your problem. In the workplace, it fosters a toxic environment of fear and resentment, where creativity is stifled and team members are more focused on avoiding blame than on achieving collective goals. To interact with this level of the iceberg is to feel as though you are arguing with smoke. There is nothing solid to grasp, no common ground of shared reality. The apology, when it does come, is almost always a counterfeit. It will be the non-apology, "I'm sorry you feel that way," which subtly places the blame on your reaction rather than their action. Or it will be an apology with a caveat, "I'm sorry, but you have to admit you were also." Understanding level 37 is not about learning how to force a narcissist to be accountable. That is a futile endeavor. It is about recognizing the pattern for what it is, a deeply ingrained defense mechanism. By seeing it clearly, you can begin to detach from the emotionally exhausting cycle of seeking validation or justice where none can be found. You can stop internalizing the blame that is so expertly offloaded onto you. And in this understanding, in this quiet observation of the mechanism at work, you can find the clarity to protect your own sense of reality and your own peace. Allow this knowledge to settle, a quiet truth that brings not anger, but a calm, liberating acceptance.
Pathological lying. As we descend now past the more visible and commonly understood traits, we arrive at level 38 of our exploration. Here, submerged in the cold, deep waters of the iceberg, we encounter a phenomenon that is fundamental to the very structure of the narcissistic personality: pathological lying. This is not the simple, goal-oriented deception we all recognize. This is something more pervasive, more compulsive, and more deeply intertwined with the individual's sense of self. The concept was first formally described in 1891 by the German physician Anton Delbruck, who termed it pseudologia fantastica. He observed a pattern of lying that was remarkable for its elaborate, fantastical, and often enduring nature. Unlike a typical lie told to avoid punishment or achieve a specific gain, pathological lying often appears motiveless, or the motivation is buried so deeply within the individual's psychology that it is not immediately apparent. The lies are often dramatic, complicated, and detailed, casting the liar in a heroic or victimized light. Crucially, the liar themselves may come to believe, at least partially, in their own fabrications. When we apply this concept to the narcissistic individual, we find a perfect symbiotic relationship. For the narcissist, reality is a malleable substance, a raw material to be shaped and molded to support their grandiose self-image. Pathological lying is not merely a tool, it is the very mechanism by which they construct and maintain this fragile artificial world. Let us examine the mechanism more closely. The core of the narcissistic personality is a profound and terrifying emptiness, a void where a stable sense of self-worth should be. To protect themselves from this internal collapse, they construct a false self, an idealized, perfect, and all-powerful persona. Reality, however, is constantly threatening to shatter this illusion. A minor criticism, a professional setback, or even a casual remark that doesn't affirm their superiority can be experienced as a catastrophic narcissistic injury. This is where pathological lying becomes their primary defense. A lie is instantly deployed to patch the crack in their facade. If they fail at a task, they did not fail. Rather, they were sabotaged by jealous colleagues, or they intentionally allowed others to succeed out of magnanimity. If they are caught in a contradiction, they will insist that you have misremembered, that the event never happened as you recall,
Or they will invent a complex backstory to justify their original statement. These lies are not just spoken, they are woven into the fabric of their perceived reality. For the narcissist, the lie is often more real and certainly more preferable than the intolerable truth. Furthermore, these elaborate narratives are a potent source of narcissistic supply. By fabricating stories of incredible triumphs, harrowing victimhood, or exclusive connections to powerful people, the narcissist commands the attention and admiration of their audience. They become the protagonist in an epic tale of their own making. The listener's rapt attention, their sympathy, their awe, this is the fuel that powers the narcissistic engine. The lack of empathy is a critical component here. The narcissist is unconcerned with the confusion, emotional distress, or erosion of trust their lies cause in others. Other people are simply supporting characters or props in their personal drama. Consider the application of this in a relationship. The narcissist might invent a prestigious past, claiming degrees from universities they never attended, or heroic feats they never performed. They might lie about trivial, easily verifiable things, what they ate for lunch, a phone call they claimed to have made, simply to assert control over the narrative and to test the boundaries of what you are willing to believe. This constant stream of falsehoods creates a disorienting fog for their partners, friends, and family, a state of perpetual uncertainty often referred to as gaslighting. You begin to doubt your own memory, your own perception, your own sanity, because the narcissist's reality is presented with such unshakable conviction. Thus, at this level of the iceberg, we see that lying is not an occasional strategy for the narcissist. It is as essential and as automatic as breathing. It is the architect of their identity, the guardian of their fragile ego, and the primary currency through which they engage with the world. It is the constant, laborious process of painting over a reality they cannot bear to face. Circular arguments. As we descend now deeper into the quiet, complex waters of the iceberg, we arrive at level 39. Here, we encounter a phenomenon not of overt aggression, but of subtle, maddening, and inescapable logic. We are exploring the world of the circular argument. Allow your mind to settle as we examine this concept. A circular argument, known in classical rhetoric as petitio principii, or begging the question, is a logical fallacy where the conclusion of an argument is already assumed in one of its premises. It is a statement that proves itself with itself. Imagine a staircase that, after a few steps, magically leads you right back to the bottom landing where you began. You have moved, you have expended energy, but you have made no progress. You are trapped in a loop. This form of reasoning is not designed to persuade through evidence or logic. It is designed to exhaust and dominate. It creates a closed system, a fortress of self-reference from which the speaker never has to venture out into the messy world of objective facts or external validation. The argument is its own evidence. The statement is its own proof. Within the context of narcissistic interaction, the circular argument becomes a powerful tool for control and reality bending. It is a signature move used to shut down dissent, to avoid accountability, and to reinforce an unshakable sense of being right. Let us consider a common example. You might question a narcissist's trustworthiness. You could say, "I'm not sure I can believe what you're telling me." They might respond with complete conviction, "Of course you can believe me. I am a trustworthy person." If you press further, asking, "What makes you a trustworthy person?" the circularity snaps shut. "You know I'm trustworthy," they might say, "because I am telling you the truth right now." Do you see the loop? The premise is, I am trustworthy. The conclusion is, you should believe me. The evidence offered for the premise is the conclusion itself. There is no external proof, no history of honest actions, no corroborating evidence. The argument is a snake consuming its own tail. To argue against it is to argue against a ghost. You cannot disprove it with facts because facts are irrelevant to its structure. Another manifestation appears in the realm of blame. A narcissist might say, "The reason we are fighting is because you are always too emotional." When you, naturally, become upset by this accusation, they will point to your emotional reaction and say, "See, you're getting upset right now. That just proves my point. You are too emotional."
Your very reaction to the initial unfair premise is twisted and used as evidence for that same premise. You are placed in a perfect, unwinnable bind.
To remain calm is to silently accept the accusation. To react is to confirm it. The psychological toll of these interactions is immense. It is a form of intellectual and emotional quicksand. The more you struggle for logical footing, the deeper you sink into confusion and self-doubt. These conversations are not meant to be resolved. They are designed to be won by attrition. The goal is to make you so tired, so frustrated, and so mentally disoriented that you simply give up. And in your surrender, their version of reality stands victorious. You are left questioning your own perception, your own sanity, while they remain secure within the impenetrable walls of their self-referential world. As you rest now, simply observe this pattern from a distance. See it for the closed, self-contained loop that it is. It has no real power over objective truth. It is merely a phantom staircase leading nowhere. And by seeing it, you are no longer compelled to climb it. You can simply let it be and allow your own mind to find its rest on solid ground.
Stonewalling. As we descend further into the submerged crystalline layers of our iceberg, we arrive at level 40. Here, in the quiet, pressurized depths, we encounter a formidable and chilling defense mechanism, stonewalling. The term itself evokes a powerful image, a solid, impenetrable wall of stone erected in the middle of a conversation. It is a barrier designed not for protection, but for exclusion. Stonewalling, in the psychological sense, is the deliberate and complete withdrawal from interaction. It is a refusal to communicate, to cooperate, or to even acknowledge the other person's presence. This is not the same as taking a healthy pause during a heated discussion to cool down. A healthy timeout is a collaborative act, usually announced with the intention of returning to the conversation later once emotions have settled. Stonewalling, by contrast, is a unilateral act of shutting down. It is a punitive silence, a form of passive aggression that functions as a potent weapon of control. The concept was famously identified and studied by the psychologist Dr. John Gottman. In his decades of research into marital stability, he named stonewalling as one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, 4 communication patterns so destructive that their presence could predict the end of a relationship with startling accuracy. The other 3, for context, are criticism, contempt, and defensiveness. Gottman observed that stonewalling is often a response to feeling physiologically flooded, a state of overwhelming emotional arousal where the body's fight or flight system takes over. However, in the hands of a narcissist, this physiological response is honed into a strategic, manipulative tool. The narcissist does not stonewall simply because they are overwhelmed. They stonewall to achieve a specific outcome. The mechanism serves several of their core needs simultaneously. First, it is an instrument of punishment. If you have said or done something to displease the narcissist, perhaps you offered a mild criticism, set a boundary, or failed to provide sufficient admiration, they may erect the wall. The sudden, deafening silence is designed to make you feel anxious, isolated, and desperate for reconnection. It is a way of saying, you have transgressed, and you will be punished with my absence until you learn your lesson. Second, stonewalling is an ultimate act of control. By refusing to engage, the narcissist seizes complete control over the interaction. They dictate when or if communication will resume. This forces the other person into a position of supplication, often leading them to frantically apologize, backtrack, or concede to the narcissist's demands just to break the suffocating silence. The entire emotional climate of the relationship is now in the stonewaller's hands. Third, it is the perfect strategy for avoiding accountability. A narcissist's fragile ego cannot tolerate the shame of being wrong or at fault. By stonewalling, they can effectively end any conversation that veers towards their own fallibility. If they do not engage with the topic, they cannot be held responsible. The wall makes them impervious to facts, feelings, and consequences. The application of stonewalling can be both overt and subtle. It can be the classic silent treatment, lasting for hours or even days. It can be the physical act of turning their back on you while you are speaking, picking up a book, or simply walking out of the room. In our digital age, it manifests as leaving messages on read without a reply, or a sudden and unexplained halt in all digital communication. The stonewaller often adopts a blank, disengaged facial expression, a mask of utter indifference that communicates a profound and painful message. You do not matter. Your words are meaningless. You, to me, do not exist right now. For the person on the receiving end, the experience is profoundly disorienting. The human brain is wired for social connection and reciprocity. A sudden, unexplained withdrawal is interpreted by our nervous system as a form of abandonment, a primal threat. It creates a vacuum that the mind rushes to fill with self-doubt, guilt, and anxiety. Stonewalling is not an absence of communication. It is a very loud, very clear communication of devaluation and dismissal. It is a silent declaration of power, a fortress built of avoidance, and a chillingly effective tool for emotional manipulation. Fragile ego. Welcome. Settle in and let your mind gently descend with us, moving deeper into the intricate structure of the narcissistic iceberg. We now arrive at level 41, a layer that lies far beneath the surface, yet dictates nearly everything that is visible above. This is the level of the fragile ego. At first, this concept may seem like a paradox. How can the narcissist, with their grandiose pronouncements, their unshakable self-certainty, and their air of superiority, possibly possess an ego that is fragile? It is one of the most fundamental misunderstandings of the condition. The grandiosity is not evidence of a strong ego. It is the very fortress built to protect an ego that is exquisitely, almost unimaginably brittle. To understand this, we must first distinguish between a healthy ego and a narcissistic one. A healthy, resilient ego, what psychoanalysts might call a well-integrated sense of self, is like a deeply rooted, flexible tree. It can withstand the winds of criticism, it can bear the weight of its own mistakes, and it can grow from the nourishment of feedback. It does not require constant praise to know its own worth, for its worth is internal, developed over time through genuine accomplishment, secure attachments, and self-acceptance. The narcissistic ego, by contrast, is more like a magnificent, shimmering palace made of spun glass. It is breathtaking to behold from a distance, reflecting light in a dazzling display of perfection, but it has no tensile strength. The slightest tap, the smallest stone of criticism, the faintest tremor of perceived rejection threatens to fracture the entire structure. The origins of this fragility lie deep in developmental history. Thinkers like Heinz Kohut, a pioneer in the field of self-psychology, proposed that a child develops a healthy sense of self through the affirming responses of their caregivers, a process he called mirroring. When a child's feelings, accomplishments, and very being are seen, acknowledged, and celebrated, they internalize a stable sense of their own value. They learn that they are good enough just as they are. The individual who develops narcissistic traits, however, has often experienced a profound deficit in this mirroring. Their authentic self, with its messy feelings, its needs, and its imperfections, was not seen or was actively rejected. They learned at a primal level that their true self was unacceptable. To survive emotionally, a defense mechanism of monumental scale was erected, the false self. This is the grandiose, perfect, all-knowing persona the world sees. It is a strategic creation designed to win the approval and admiration that the true self never received. Herein lies the mechanism of fragility. The false self has no real foundation. It is a performance. It is hollow. It requires constant external validation, what we call narcissistic supply, to maintain its shape. Praise, admiration, envy, and power are the scaffolding that holds the glass palace together. Without a constant inflow of this supply, the structure begins to tremble. This is why a narcissist's reaction to criticism is so disproportionate. When you offer constructive feedback, you are not merely commenting on their work or behavior. In their internal world, you are taking a sledgehammer to the very walls of their identity. You are threatening to expose the void behind the facade,
the terrified, shamed, and deeply insecure true self that they have spent a lifetime burying. The rage, the denial, the projection, and the devaluation that follow are not just an overreaction. They are frantic, desperate attempts to protect the fragile core from annihilation. It is an existential threat. This fragility manifests in a constant, exhausting vigilance. It is seen in their inability to ever be wrong, for being wrong would be an admission of imperfection, causing a crack in the glass. It is seen in their consuming envy, for another's success feels like a direct invalidation of their own specialness. Every interaction is a referendum on their worth, and every social landscape is a battlefield for securing their position at the top. As we rest here, at level 41, contemplate this profound duality. The arrogant king is, in reality, a terrified child. The impenetrable fortress has walls of paper. Understanding this does not excuse the harm they may cause, but it illuminates the tragic internal engine that drives the behavior. The grand display is not a celebration of self, but a desperate defense against its perceived absence. And in that quiet understanding, you can allow your own awareness to soften and drift even deeper into a state of peace.
Deep-seated insecurity. As we continue our gentle descent, we arrive at level 42 of the Narcissism Iceberg. Here, submerged just below the more visible layers of grandiosity and entitlement, we encounter a fundamental driving force, deep-seated insecurity. This is not the fleeting self-doubt that visits us all from time to time. Rather, this is a foundational, structural wound. It is the hollow chamber at the core of the narcissistic personality, a void so terrifyingly vast that the entire grandiose edifice is constructed to conceal it, both from the world and, most importantly, from the self. To understand this level, we must turn to the insights of psychoanalytic thought. Theorists like Heinz Kohut and Otto Kernberg, while differing in their specific formulations, both pointed to a profound deficit in the early development of the self. Kohut spoke of the narcissistic wound, a failure in childhood mirroring. Imagine an infant looking to a caregiver's face for a reflection of its own value, its own existence. When that reflection is absent, inconsistent, or distorted, when the caregiver is unable to provide the validation and admiration necessary for a healthy self to cohere, the child is left with a sense of profound emptiness and shame. The grandiose self, in this view, is a desperate, lifelong attempt to finally secure the mirroring that was never given. It is a constant, frantic performance demanding the world to act as the mirror that a parent could not be. This deep-seated insecurity operates as a kind of psychological black hole, exerting an immense gravitational pull on the individual's entire personality. The constant need for admiration, what we call narcissistic supply, is not a simple desire for praise. It is a desperate effort to fill this internal void. Each compliment, each moment of adulation is like a temporary patch over a gaping hole. But the patch never holds for long, and the gnawing emptiness soon returns. This is why the need is insatiable. It is an attempt to solve an internal problem with external solutions, a task doomed to fail. The mechanism of defense against this intolerable feeling of worthlessness is the false self. This construct is not merely a mask, it is a rigid, all-encompassing fortress. It is built from idealized images of power, perfection, intelligence, and specialness. Inside this fortress, the true wounded self, small, terrified, and ashamed, is imprisoned. Any perceived slight, any criticism, any failure is not just an insult. It is a seismic event that threatens to crack the fortress walls and expose the horrifying inadequacy hidden within. This is what we call a narcissistic injury, and it explains the shocking intensity of the narcissistic rage that often follows.
The rage is not proportional to the event, it is proportional to the terror of being exposed. Therefore, when you observe the seemingly unshakable arrogance, the relentless self-promotion, or the contemptuous dismissal of others, you are not witnessing genuine self-esteem. You are witnessing the frantic, prophylactic measures of a psyche terrified of its own perceived worthlessness. The devaluation of others is a crucial part of this defense. By projecting inferiority onto those around them,
The narcissist creates a landscape of comparison in which they can feel momentarily superior. If everyone else is flawed, incompetent, or beneath them, then their own deep-seated fear of being flawed and incompetent is temporarily quieted. It is a fragile and fleeting victory, one that must be reenacted endlessly. At this level of the iceberg, we see that the most strident displays of superiority are often the most direct evidence of the profound insecurity they are designed to conceal. The grandiosity is not the opposite of the insecurity. It is its direct and tragic consequence.
Black and white thinking, splitting. As we continue our descent, settling deeper into the quiet, cool layers of the iceberg, we arrive at level 43. Let the gentle current of this exploration guide you toward rest as we illuminate a foundational concept in the narcissistic structure, the phenomenon of black and white thinking, known in psychological terms as splitting. Imagine for a moment a world painted in only two colors, the purest, most brilliant white and the deepest, most absolute black. There are no shades of gray, no subtle tones of charcoal, silver, or slate. An object, a person, or an experience can only be one or the other. This is the perceptual reality created by splitting. It is not merely a preference for simplicity. It is a rigid, unconscious defense mechanism that protects a fragile ego from the complexities and anxieties of emotional nuance. Splitting, or dichotomous thinking, has its roots in early psychoanalytic theory, particularly in the work of Melanie Klein and the School of Object Relations. The theory posits that as infants, we are not yet capable of seeing our caregivers as whole, complex individuals. We can only process them in parts. There is the good mother who feeds and soothes us, and the bad mother who frustrates us or is absent. We cannot yet integrate these two experiences into a single, cohesive person who is sometimes nurturing and sometimes unavailable. This is a normal developmental stage. However, for individuals who develop narcissistic personality structures, this primitive defense mechanism is not outgrown. It is retained and heavily fortified, becoming a primary way of organizing their entire world. So, how does this mechanism function? At its core, splitting is a defense against ambivalence. Ambivalence is the capacity to hold two opposing feelings or thoughts about the same person or situation simultaneously. For a healthy psyche, this is normal. You can love your partner deeply while also feeling annoyed by a specific habit. You can be proud of a professional accomplishment while also acknowledging its flaws. This ability to hold contradictory truths is a sign of emotional maturity. The narcissistic individual's sense of self is far too brittle to withstand this tension. Their grandiose self-image is an all-good construct. To admit a flaw, to accept criticism, or to feel disappointment in themselves threatens to shatter this entire facade. The anxiety this produces is intolerable. Therefore, the psyche splits. Anything that threatens the all-good self is projected outward and designated as all bad. This manifests most clearly in the notorious cycle of idealization and devaluation.
When you first enter their orbit and provide narcissistic supply, admiration, agreement, validation, you are integrated into their grandiose self-concept. You are flawless, perfect, a soulmate. You are painted in the most brilliant white. You are the all-good object. But the moment you deviate by expressing a different opinion, setting a boundary, or simply having a human flaw, you introduce a contradiction they cannot process. You are no longer a perfect mirror. The anxiety is triggered and the splitting mechanism activates with breathtaking speed. You are no longer a good person with a minor flaw. The entire file on you is corrupted and rewritten. You are cast out from the all-good self and become the all-bad other. You are now selfish, manipulative, and malicious. There is no middle ground, no memory of the good you once shared, because to acknowledge that would be to acknowledge ambivalence, and their psyche cannot tolerate it. You are either an angel or a demon, an ally or an enemy. This binary thinking extends to everything. A project is either a work of genius or a complete catastrophe. Their own self-perception oscillates between godlike grandiosity and, in moments of collapse, a pit of worthless shame. By simplifying the world into these stark extremes, the narcissist creates a false sense of control and predictability.
shielding their fragile ego from the overwhelming and nuanced reality that the rest of us inhabit. It is a world without forgiveness, without grace, and without the possibility of genuine integrated human connection. And as you drift deeper now, let this understanding settle, a piece of the puzzle falling quietly into place.
Cognitive dissonance. Welcome. As we descend deeper into our exploration, we arrive at level 44. Here, we encounter a concept that is not a narcissistic trait itself, but rather the very engine that allows the dynamic of a narcissistic relationship to persist. It is the psychological mechanism that keeps us tethered to confusion, trapped in a fog of contradiction. We are speaking of cognitive dissonance. The term was first introduced by the social psychologist Leon Festinger in the late 1950s. His theory proposed a profound and fundamental truth about the human mind. We have an innate drive to maintain consistency among our beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. When this internal harmony is disrupted, when we hold two or more contradictory ideas, or when our actions clash with our beliefs, we experience a state of mental discomfort, a psychological stress. This discomfort is cognitive dissonance, and the mind, in its relentless pursuit of equilibrium, will do almost anything to resolve it. To understand its mechanism, consider Festinger's classic experiment. He had participants perform an excruciatingly dull task, turning pegs on a board for an hour. Afterwards, he asked them to tell the next participant that the task was in fact fascinating and enjoyable. For this lie, one group was paid a mere $1, while another group was paid $20. Later, when asked to rate their genuine enjoyment of the task, a curious result emerged. The group paid $20 still rated the task as dull. Their justification was simple: I lied, but I was well compensated for it. The large payment resolved the dissonance between their action, lying, and their belief, the task was boring. However, the group paid only $1 had a much harder time. The meager payment was not enough to justify the lie. The dissonance between I am an honest person and I just lied for no good reason was too great. So, to reduce this discomfort, their minds performed a remarkable act of self-persuasion. They began to genuinely believe that the task wasn't so bad after all, that it was perhaps somewhat interesting. They changed their belief to match their action, thereby restoring internal consistency. This brings us to the core application of this phenomenon within the context of narcissism. A relationship with a narcissist is a masterclass in cognitive dissonance, a constant and exhausting exercise in trying to reconcile the irreconcilable. It begins during the idealization phase. You develop a core belief: this person is my soulmate, they are kind, loving, and they understand me perfectly. This belief is reinforced with intense affection and grand promises. Then the devaluation begins. The behavior changes. The person who adored you is now critical, dismissive, or cruel. Now your mind is forced to hold two profoundly contradictory cognitions. Cognition A: this person is my loving soulmate. Cognition B: this person is causing me immense pain. The dissonance is excruciating. Your mind scrambles to resolve it. It is often far too painful to discard the foundational belief that this person is good and that the love is real. To do so would be to admit the entire relationship is a sham, a devastating conclusion. So, like the participants in Festinger's study, you begin to change the other cognition. You rationalize the hurtful behavior. They're just stressed from work. They didn't really mean it. Or, most insidiously, it must be my fault. I did something to provoke this. You alter your perception of their cruelty to make it fit with your belief in their love. This is not a sign of weakness. It is a testament to the powerful, automatic, and deeply human drive to maintain a consistent internal world. Gaslighting is the active weaponization of cognitive dissonance. The narcissist presents a version of reality that directly contradicts your own memory and perception. I never said that. You're being too sensitive. That didn't happen. You are left with two clashing truths: your own lived experience versus the confident, unwavering narrative of the person you trust. To reduce the intense dissonance, it often becomes easier to doubt your own sanity than to accept the terrifying alternative: that the person you love is deliberately and systematically deceiving you. Understanding cognitive dissonance is like being given a map to the maze you've been lost in. It explains why you stayed, why you made excuses, and why you doubted yourself. It reveals that the confusion you felt was not a flaw in your own mind, but a predictable response to an impossible psychological equation. Recognizing this mechanism is the first crucial step in dismantling it, in learning to trust your own perception again, and in finding your way back to the solid ground of reality.
Need for control. As we descend now past the more visible and superficial layers of the iceberg, we arrive at level 45. Here, we encounter a foundational pillar of the narcissistic structure, the profound and insatiable need for control. This is not the simple desire for order that many of us feel, nor is it the ambition of a natural leader. For the narcissist, control is a non-negotiable existential necessity, a desperate attempt to regulate a terrifyingly chaotic inner world by rigidly managing the outer one. To understand this mechanism, we must first appreciate its origins. The narcissistic personality is built upon a deeply unstable foundation. Beneath the grandiosity and the performance of superiority lies a fragile, fragmented sense of self, haunted by profound feelings of inadequacy and shame. The external world, with its unpredictability, its independent agents, and its potential for criticism or rejection, poses a constant and mortal threat to this fragile ego. Any event, any person, or any opinion that is not perfectly aligned with their desired narrative can trigger a catastrophic collapse of their self-worth. Control, therefore, becomes a form of psychological homeostasis. It is the primary tool used to create a predictable, manageable environment where the narcissist is the central author, director, and protagonist of the story. By controlling people, circumstances, and information, they attempt to build a fortress against the anxieties of helplessness and the terror of being exposed as flawed or ordinary. They are the stage manager of their own reality, and every other person is merely an actor who must adhere to a very specific script. Any improvisation is seen not as creativity, but as a betrayal. This need for control manifests in a variety of ways, often escalating in subtlety and intensity as one becomes more enmeshed in their world. It can begin with micromanagement in the workplace or at home, where every small task must be done their way. Not because their way is necessarily better, but because deviation from their method implies a challenge to their authority and competence. They may control conversations, steering them endlessly back to themselves, interrupting others, or dismissing topics that do not serve their immediate interests. In more intimate relationships, this control becomes far more pervasive. It can take the form of financial control, where one partner is made entirely dependent on the other, their autonomy systematically dismantled. It can be social control, where the narcissist subtly or overtly isolates their partner from friends and family, framing these external relationships as threats or bad influences. This creates a closed system, a feedback loop, where the narcissist is the sole source of information, validation, and reality itself. Perhaps the most insidious form of this is informational control, which leads directly to phenomena like gaslighting. By controlling the flow of information, by withholding truths, twisting facts, and denying reality, the narcissist seeks to control another person's perception. They aim to make you doubt your own memory, your own sanity, and your own judgment. If they can control your reality, they can ensure you will never challenge theirs. This is not simply about winning an argument. It is about colonizing another person's mind to secure their own psychological stability. And so, as we observe this dynamic at level 45, we understand that the narcissist's drive for control is not born of strength, but of profound weakness. It is the desperate, all-consuming effort to build and maintain an external structure that can contain an internal world on the verge of collapse. It is the scaffolding erected around a hollow core, a constant, exhausting performance designed to keep the terrifying truth of their own fragility at bay.
Fear of abandonment. Welcome back.
As we continue our descent, allow the gentle current of understanding to carry you deeper. We now arrive at level 46, a foundational stratum of the narcissistic psyche, a core element so powerful it dictates the architecture of the entire personality structure above it. Here, in the cold, quiet depths, we find a primal terror that underpins so much of the observable behavior, the profound fear of abandonment. On the surface of the iceberg, we see grandiosity, entitlement, and an air of impenetrable self-confidence. But these are merely the frozen fortifications built to protect a deeply fragile core. The fear of abandonment in a narcissistic individual is not the common anxiety of loneliness that many people experience. It is a far more existential dread. To them, abandonment is not just the loss of a person, it is the loss of a mirror. It is the withdrawal of narcissistic supply, the admiration, validation, and attention that serves as the very oxygen for their constructed self-image, their false self. Without this external reflection, they risk collapsing into an inner void, a terrifying emptiness where they must confront the unlovable, shame-ridden true self they have spent a lifetime fleeing. This is a fear of psychic annihilation. To understand its origins, we must travel back to the earliest stages of development. Attachment theory, pioneered by figures like John Bowlby, posits that a child's early bonds with caregivers form a blueprint for all future relationships. The individual who develops a narcissistic structure often experienced a deeply flawed attachment process. Their caregivers may have been inconsistent, emotionally unavailable, or offered love that was highly conditional. The child learns a devastating lesson. Their authentic self, with its genuine needs and messy emotions, is not enough to secure love and prevent abandonment. Instead, they are valued for what they do, for their performance, for their ability to reflect glory back onto the parent. In response to this implicit threat of being discarded, the child begins to construct a more palatable, more impressive persona, the false self. This grandiose self is a survival strategy designed specifically to be indispensable, to be so dazzling or so perfect that no one would ever dream of leaving it. This early adaptation becomes the central mechanism in the adult. The fear of abandonment operates like a constant, low-frequency hum of anxiety beneath the surface. This anxiety is the engine that drives the relentless pursuit of narcissistic supply. Every compliment, every piece of praise, every ounce of attention is a temporary reassurance that the false self is working, that the fortress is holding, and that the dreaded abandonment is being kept at bay. Let us consider its practical application in relationships, where this fear is most acutely activated. The initial stage of idealization, or love bombing, is a direct manifestation of this fear. The narcissist showers a new partner with overwhelming affection and attention, not out of genuine love, but as a preemptive strategy to secure the source of supply. They are attempting to create a powerful bond of dependency, to make themselves so essential to the partner's happiness that the partner would never leave. However, the moment the narcissist perceives a threat of abandonment, a criticism, a request for space, a partner's independent success, the fear is triggered. And the defense mechanism is swift and brutal. They will engage in devaluation, pushing the partner away and criticizing them for the very qualities they once idealized. This is a paradoxical, preemptive strike born of terror. I will reject you before you have the chance to reject me. It is a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative and the relationship, proving to themselves that they are the one with the power to abandon, not the one who is abandoned. This cycle, from idealization to devaluation to a potential hoover to pull the person back in when the fear becomes unbearable again, is powered almost entirely by this deep, unacknowledged terror. And so, as we drift deeper, allow this understanding to settle. The arrogant facade, the controlling behaviors, the punishing devaluations, all can be seen as the desperate and dysfunctional maneuvers of a personality fundamentally organized around preventing a catastrophic early life fear from ever coming true. The fortress of narcissism is built not on a foundation of strength, but on the terrifying fault line of abandonment. The false self.
As we continue our descent, leaving the more visible surface-level phenomena behind, we arrive now at level 47. Here, submerged in the cool, quiet depths of the psyche, we encounter a foundational concept, a central pillar in the architecture of the narcissistic personality. We have arrived at the false self. To understand the false self, we must first acknowledge its counterpart, the true self. The true self is the core of our being, the wellspring of our authentic feelings, our spontaneous gestures, our innate creativity. It is the self that exists without an audience, the part of us that simply is. In a healthy developmental environment, this true self is seen, acknowledged, and nurtured by primary caregivers. It is allowed to be vulnerable, to make mistakes, and to express its genuine needs, and in doing so, it grows strong and integrated. The false self, however, is born from the absence of this nurturing environment. Its origins are most famously articulated by the British psychoanalyst D.W. Winnicott. He proposed that when a caregiver is not attuned to the infant's needs, perhaps they are intrusive, neglectful, or demand that the infant meet their emotional needs instead, the infant faces a terrible dilemma. Its spontaneous expressions of self are ignored, rejected, or even punished. To survive, to secure the attachment and care it desperately needs, the child learns to suppress its true self. It intuits what the caregiver wants and begins to perform it. This performance, this compliant and adaptive persona, is the genesis of the false self. Initially, it is a brilliant and necessary defense mechanism. It is a protective shield erected around the tender, vulnerable true self to protect it from further injury and rejection. But for the individual who develops a narcissistic personality structure, this defense becomes a permanent prison. The false self is not simply a mask worn in certain situations. It becomes the entirety of their conscious identity. The true self, with all its authentic but unacceptable feelings of weakness, shame, and neediness, is disowned and locked away in the deepest recesses of the mind, viewed with contempt. The mechanism of the false self is one of perpetual, exhausting performance. It is an elaborate construct built from pieces of what it perceives to be admirable: intelligence from one person, charm from another, a particular style of dress, a set of opinions borrowed from an esteemed source. It is a collage, an imitation of a person, but it lacks an authentic integrated core. Its primary function is to elicit narcissistic supply, admiration, praise, envy, and attention. This external validation is not merely a preference, it is a structural necessity. Without a constant inflow of supply, the false self begins to feel hollow, unreal, and threatens to collapse, exposing the terrifying void and the despised true self that lies beneath. In application, this is why an individual high in narcissistic traits can seem so perfect, so magnetic, especially in the beginning. You are not meeting a person, you are meeting their meticulously crafted, highly polished representative. This false self is an expert at mirroring. It will study you, learn your desires and values, and reflect them back to you, creating an intoxicating illusion of a soulmate connection. It is also why they cannot tolerate criticism. A critique, no matter how small or constructive, is not perceived as feedback on a specific behavior. It is perceived as a direct attack on the entire fragile artifice of their being, a crack in the fortress wall that threatens to bring the whole structure crashing down. This is what triggers the profound rage or collapse known as narcissistic injury. The false self must be seen as perfect and omnipotent at all times because its very existence depends on it. And so, here at level 47, we observe this tragic figure, a persona built for applause, living in a gilded cage of its own making. It is a life devoid of true intimacy, as genuine connection requires the vulnerability of the true self. It is a constant, draining effort to maintain a facade, forever fearing the exposure of the emptiness within. As we let this concept settle, allow your mind to consider the profound difference between a persona we choose to adopt and a prison that has taken over the self. Allow this thought to drift as we continue our journey even deeper into the silent waters.
The true self, repressed. Welcome back. As we continue our descent, leaving the more observable phenomena of the upper layers behind, we now arrive at a place of profound psychological depth. Here, at level 48, we encounter a concept that is not an action or a trait, but rather an absence, a foundational void upon which the entire narcissistic structure is built. We are speaking of the true self, and more specifically, its active and near total repression. To understand this, we must journey back to the pioneering work of psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott. He proposed that every infant is born with an authentic, spontaneous core, a true self. This self is vulnerable, uninhibited, and expresses genuine needs and feelings. In a healthy developmental environment, with what he termed a good enough parent, this true self is seen, mirrored, and accepted. The child learns that its authentic emotions are valid, that its needs are legitimate, and that it is loved for who it truly is. For the individual who develops a narcissistic personality, this crucial mirroring process fails. The child's authentic self, with its messy emotions, its dependencies, and its imperfections, is not met with acceptance. Instead, it is met with disapproval, neglect, shame, or the implicit demand that the child be something else, more perfect, less needy, more impressive. The child receives a devastating message. The real you is not acceptable. The real you is a source of disappointment and is fundamentally unlovable. To survive this intolerable reality, the child performs a desperate act of psychological self-preservation. The true self, this core of authentic feeling and vulnerability, is deemed a liability. It is pushed down, locked away in the deepest, coldest recesses of the psyche. It is repressed. And in its place, a new self is meticulously constructed. This is the false self, or what we recognize as the narcissistic persona. This false self is everything the true self is not. It is grandiose, invulnerable, perfect, and seemingly self-sufficient. It is designed to win the approval and admiration that the true self could not. The mechanism of this repression is profound. It is not simply a conscious decision to hide one's feelings. It is an unconscious disavowal of one's own core identity. The true self becomes associated with an unbearable, toxic shame. To feel the vulnerability or neediness of the true self would be to risk psychological annihilation. Therefore, the entire psychic system is organized to prevent this from ever happening. The grandiosity, the constant need for admiration, the rage at criticism, all of these are defensive ramparts built to protect the fortress of the false self and to keep the prisoner, the true self, locked in its dungeon. This explains so much of the perplexing behavior we see at the surface. The narcissist is not simply pretending to be grandiose. On a fundamental level, they believe they are the false self. The true self is so deeply buried that they may have no conscious awareness of its existence. Yet its absence creates a permanent, gnawing emptiness inside, a void where a stable sense of identity should be. The relentless pursuit of narcissistic supply, attention, admiration, power, is a desperate attempt to fill this void, to get external validation that the false self is real and substantial. But it is a futile effort, like pouring water into a bottomless pit, because no amount of external validation can ever reanimate a repressed inner core. The tragedy of level 48 is that the narcissist has sacrificed their own authenticity for a hollow crown. The entire elaborate performance of their life is staged for an audience, while the true self remains a silent, forgotten ghost in the machine, an echo of a person who was never allowed to be.
Grandiosity as a defense. Welcome back. As we descend further into the quiet depths of the narcissistic iceberg, we leave the more turbulent surface waters behind. Here, at level 49, we encounter a structure that appears, at first glance, to be solid, impenetrable, and even magnificent. This is the level of grandiosity, but we are here to understand it not as a simple character trait, but as a profound and desperate defense. Let us begin by defining our terms. Grandiosity, in its most direct sense, is an unrealistic and inflated sense of self-importance. It is the belief that one is uniquely special,
superior to others, and destined for greatness. It is the narrative of being more intelligent, more attractive, more capable, and more entitled than everyone else. On the surface, it presents as unshakable confidence, as arrogance, as a kind of regal certainty. But here, in the cold, analytical quiet, we must ask, what purpose does this towering edifice serve? The key is in the phrase, as a defense. In psychoanalytic thought, a defense mechanism is an unconscious strategy used by the ego to protect itself from anxiety arising from unacceptable thoughts or feelings. Grandiosity, in this context, is not a celebration of a genuinely robust self-esteem. It is a fortress built to conceal its exact opposite, a deeply rooted, terrifying sense of inadequacy, worthlessness, and shame. Imagine a child who experiences a profound early wound, a failure of attunement from a caregiver, a sense of being unseen, unloved, or fundamentally flawed. This core feeling of, I am not good enough, is an existential terror. It is a psychological state so painful that the developing mind cannot tolerate it. And so, it performs a desperate and brilliant inversion. It does not merely deny the feeling of worthlessness, it constructs an entire reality based on its opposite. The internal whisper of, I am nothing, is silenced by an external, booming declaration of, I am everything. Theorists like Heinz Kohut and Otto Kernberg offered us crucial maps to this territory. Kohut saw this grandiose self as a developmental arrest. For him, a child's natural, healthy grandiosity needs to be met with empathetic mirroring from parents, allowing it to be gradually tempered and integrated into a realistic self-concept. When this mirroring fails, the archaic, inflated self remains, brittle and disconnected, as a defense against the fragmentation and emptiness that result from that early failure. Kernberg viewed it with a slightly colder lens, seeing it as a pathological fusion of the ideal self and the actual self. This grandiose structure actively defends against a terrifying inner world of rage, envy, and dependency. It is a constant, exhausting effort to deny any vulnerability, because to be vulnerable is to be weak, and to be weak is to be annihilated. So, how does this mechanism function in practice? It functions as a preemptive strike against reality. The grandiose individual doesn't wait for the world to validate them. They declare their own supreme value first. They will surround themselves with evidence, however flimsy, of their superiority. They will devalue others to elevate themselves, not always out of simple malice, but as a way to maintain the structural integrity of their defense. A compliment to another person can feel like a crack in their own foundation. Criticism, even gentle, constructive feedback, is not heard as information. It is experienced as a direct, catastrophic assault on the entire defensive structure, threatening to expose the unbearable void it conceals. This is why it so often triggers a disproportionate rage, the panic of a fortress wall being breached. The grandiosity manifests in fantasies of unlimited success, power, or brilliance. It manifests in a constant need for admiration and an inability to tolerate dissent. It is the colleague who can never admit a mistake, blaming their team for any failure. It is the acquaintance who endlessly recounts their achievements, embellishing them to seem ever more impressive. We see the performance, the polished exterior, but we must remember what we are truly witnessing. We are witnessing a desperate, lifelong, and unconscious act of self-preservation. The tragedy of grandiosity as a defense is its isolating nature. It builds walls so high and so thick that no genuine connection can get in. It repels the very intimacy and validation that the fragile self within so desperately craves. It is a gilded cage, magnificent to behold from the outside, but inside a lonely prison. As we let this concept settle, feel its weight and its sorrow, this is not the strength it appears to be. It is a sign of profound inner fragility, a psychological bulwark against a sea of unbearable shame. And as we drift onward, deeper into the iceberg, we carry this understanding with us, knowing that the most imposing structures are often built to hide the most delicate of ruins.
Shame avoidance. As we continue our descent, we arrive now at level 50.
Here, in the deep, cold, and quiet middle of the iceberg, we find one of the most powerful engines driving the entire narcissistic structure, shame avoidance. This is not merely a preference or a tendency. It is a fundamental, moment-to-moment psychological imperative. To understand this level is to understand the frantic, often chaotic energy that fuels the narcissist's every defense. Let us begin by drawing a gentle but firm distinction between guilt and shame. Guilt, in a psychologically healthy individual, is the feeling that arises from having done something wrong. It is focused on an action. One might say, "I feel guilty because I made a mistake." Guilt can motivate repair, apology, and change. Shame, however, is a much deeper and more corrosive emotion. It is not about an action, but about the self. Shame says, "I feel shame because I am a mistake." It is a profound sense of being inherently flawed, defective, and unworthy. The narcissist's psyche is built upon a foundation of this deep primal shame. This core wound often originates in early life, in an environment where the child's authentic self, with all its needs, feelings, and imperfections, was not seen, valued, or accepted. This lack of validation creates a terrifying internal belief: who I truly am is unlovable and fundamentally broken. This feeling is so overwhelmingly painful, so psychologically annihilating, that the mind must construct an elaborate fortress to keep it buried at all costs. This fortress is the grandiose, false self, the charming, superior, and perfect persona presented to the world. And the primary function of this fortress is shame avoidance. Every action, every manipulation, boast, and every rage is, at its core, a desperate attempt to prevent any stimulus from the outside world from piercing this armor and touching that core of unbearable shame. The mechanisms of shame avoidance are vast and reflexive. Consider projection. When the narcissist feels a flicker of their own inadequacy, they cannot tolerate it. The shame is too close. And so, like a hot coal, it is immediately thrown onto someone else. They are not the incompetent one, you are. They are not the foolish one, you are. By making you the vessel for their shame, they achieve a momentary, desperate relief. Consider narcissistic rage. When a narcissist is criticized, questioned, or even subtly slighted, it is perceived not as a simple disagreement, but as a profound existential threat. The criticism threatens to crack the facade of the false self, allowing a sliver of that deep shame to seep through. The response is a volcanic eruption of rage.
This rage serves a dual purpose. It violently pushes away the perceived threat, and its sheer intensity floods their own system, temporarily overwhelming the terrifying feeling of shame that was beginning to surface. This is also why accountability is impossible. To accept blame would be to admit imperfection. And to admit imperfection would be to validate the core belief that they are, in fact, defective. It would open the floodgates of shame. Therefore, reality must be constantly distorted. Blame must be shifted, facts must be denied, and history must be rewritten to maintain the integrity of the fortress. The constant pursuit of narcissistic supply, admiration, praise, and attention is not merely for ego gratification. It is the lifeblood that reinforces the walls of the false self. Each compliment, each envious glance is another layer of mortar, another buttress against the crushing weight of the shame buried deep within. As you rest here at level 50, picture this dynamic not as a conscious choice, but as a relentless, unconscious reflex. It is a lifelong, exhausting, and all-consuming effort to outrun a shadow of profound, unexamined shame that dictates their every move from the silent depths.